Our story begins with a malevolent spirit, a being of pure dread, who somehow finds himself receiving the worship of millions. They haven't just built a palace for this evil god. They are even willing to offer their very bodies as sacrifices to him. All of this is possible because he is bound to the great evil god system, where every sacrifice makes him stronger. The system, perhaps worried about his lack of experience as a dark deity, decided to grant him a beginner's gift pack. However, the contents of the pack made him roll his eyes in disbelief. To be honest, it was a bit stingy for a grand gift. Following the tutorial, he opened the sacrifice panel, and a notification box immediately popped up before him. His first task was simple: complete one sacrifice. The rewards were bone summoning and a set of ordinary bone stones. And so, he sacrificed all the materials from his starter pack. A moment later, things began to change. He felt a surge of energy envelop his spiritual form, while the altar's white glow seemed to brighten significantly. With this, his level rose to the Ghost Shadow rank. He looked at the progress bar for his next level and gave a small smile. He noted that he needed 10,000 souls. With his current power, that didn't seem like such a difficult task. He immediately activated his bone summoning skill, and a skeleton wreathed in green flames materialized in front of him. Before he could take a closer look, he sensed movement outside his domain and used his divine sense to investigate. We see a snake demon hunting a group of refugees who are already exhausted from the desperate chase. They collapsed in despair, but a boy named Shirtu knelt toward the altar, whispering a frantic prayer. He begged the great immortal to save his mother, offering his very soul in exchange for her life. Our protagonist ignored the child, his eyes fixed solely on the massive serpent. It was a tempting sight. The blood energy within this snake was incredibly rich. With a single thought, he sent 2 summons to appear before the beast. The moment the snake saw the skeleton, it began to tremble uncontrollably, seemingly forgetting how to even run away. A second later, the skeleton gripped the serpent's head, and we hear the crisp, sickening sound of bone snapping. The serpent's skull was crushed instantly, and its massive body collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. Our protagonist pulled the snake's carcass into his ghost domain, then turned his gaze toward the villagers through the skeleton's eyes. He saw they were all emaciated and devoid of life. Even their combined blood energy was pitifully low. In fact, it didn't even amount to a tenth of what the snake provided. To be honest, they were hardly worth the effort. He decided it was better to gather information, so he made the skeleton scratch a question into the dirt. Who are you? And where is this? Shirtu stared at the words, his eyes lighting up as he wondered if this was the soul-collecting contract. The boy swallowed hard and begged the entity to take his soul. Our protagonist, however, was left completely baffled. The response made no sense at all. It felt as if they were having 2 entirely different conversations. But then he understood. This was clearly an ancient world, where the life of a refugee was perhaps even more grueling than an apocalypse. He sighed and decided to let them go. After all, he wasn't exactly some bloodthirsty old demon from the legends. At least, not yet. He controlled the skeleton to gently pat Shitta's hair in a surprisingly tender gesture. He then recalled his 2 summons back to the ghost domain and began to dismantle the giant snake's carcass. In total, he obtained 8 units of ordinary blood, 12 of flesh, and 9 ordinary souls from the beast. Next, he used the snake's bones and essence to summon an ancient serpent ghost. He paused to sense its power. He discovered that one serpent ghost had the combat strength of 3 skeletons. It seemed the quality of materials mattered. With that in mind, he opened the lottery interface, hoping to pull something legendary, a golden prize, perhaps. He closed his eyes as the icons flashed rapidly across the screen, finally slowing down to settle on a tombstone. He had won the Living Dead Secret Realm. A moment later, a physical tombstone materialized right next to his altar. A small prompt in the corner explained that he could enter and explore the secret realm simply by touching the stone. Just as the lottery ended, a new side quest popped up. It was time to explore the Living Dead Secret Realm. The exploration progress sat at 0%, with rewards tied to his success. Looking at this task, our protagonist couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. This secret realm looked dangerous at a glance, so he sent the ancient serpent in first. As soon as it entered, the sight that greeted him was staggering. It was the ruins of a modern residential complex. Various zombies wandered the area. After observing for a while, he realized there was some good news and some bad news. The bad news was that these zombies would mindlessly swarm any living thing. The good news? The ancient serpent wasn't alive. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind. Could these zombies be converted into materials? He decided to find out immediately. He commanded the serpent to twist the head off a zombie and drag the remains back out of the secret realm. Then, the ghost fires stepped forward to dismantle the corpse piece by piece. At that moment, the system provided a notification. He had obtained 0.9 units of ordinary flesh, 0.1 of ordinary blood, and 0.9 of ordinary bone materials. This discovery made his eyes light up. It actually worked. This secret realm was essentially an infinite energy source for him. Feeling fully motivated, he immediately dispatched all 3 of his ghost summons into the realm to start farming materials. Meanwhile, outside the ghost domain, the refugees remained frozen in place, hardly daring to breathe. Widow Li held her son, Shirtu, weeping bitter tears of relief. Shirtu reached up and touched his own hair. He realized then that he belonged to Lord Shiesue now. Shirtu took a moment to comfort Widow Li, before turning to tell the other refugees what had happened. Uncles, he said, I have given my soul to Lord Shiesue. He explained that the spirit hadn't harmed him, but had actually saved them. Naturally, the crowd erupted into a frantic chatter. The fear of Shiesue was still very real. Shirtu had to cut through their panic. I know you're all afraid, but we cannot be ungrateful. Without Lord Shiesue, we'd all be snake demon food by now. He took my soul, so I must accept him as my master. With that, he placed his own amulet on the altar. He had nothing else to offer, so this small token would have to do. As he knelt before the altar, Zhang Daju, watching from the crowd, began to understand. If gods can protect mortals, and Shiesue has protected us, then perhaps Shiesue and the gods aren't so different after all. Even hell has its governing deities, and the dead fall under their rule. One burly man slapped his stomach with a sudden realization. Perhaps the spirit in this domain is actually a god from the underworld. Hearing this, the others felt a wave of relief wash over them. They lined up to place their belongings on the altar, kneeling just as Shirtu had. After a long night passed, our protagonist had gathered over 200 units of materials. It was a respectable haul, to say the least. Using the white bones, he summoned 6 skeletons and a ghost fire, sending them all into the secret realm to begin their labor. He kept only 1 skeleton and a ghost fire behind. Then, opening the tutorial interface, he accepted the second novice task. He commanded his 2 ghost servants to leave the ghost domain, intending to gather some ordinary wood to complete the mission. Stepping outside, he noticed a pile of humble offerings atop the altar. The refugees from the night before were still there, huddled together around a stone pot they had found somewhere, busy cooking something over a fire. Someone immediately spotted the bone servant. "The Lord has appeared," they cried. "Quickly, kneel and welcome him." The crowd instantly fell to their knees before the skeleton, bowing their heads and chanting prayers under their breath. They thanked the Lord for pitying their lowly lives and for his protection. Seeing this, he felt a bit overwhelmed by their intensity. He wondered what they were doing, but as the crowd knelt, the view cleared, revealing exactly what the refugees were boiling. A few yellowed leaves floated in the murky water, with several beetles sinking to the bottom of the pot. The smell was fishy and bitter, making his stomach turn. These people, in their moment of absolute hunger, had offered their best food to a being they called Shisue. To be honest, it was a rather complicated feeling to process. As he was lost in thought, the system suddenly interrupted him. Congratulations, he had gained 12 followers. Cultivating believers and raising a food reserve is, apparently, a necessary path for every great evil god. He had taken a major step toward becoming a true deity. He raised an eyebrow. Since they followed him, they could work for him. It seemed perfectly reasonable to him. After all, most of his skeletons and ghost snakes were busy clearing the secret realm. He was currently short on hands for gathering wood and stone, and looking at his options, he had only unlocked 5 items. He exchanged points for 12 blood-drinking pills and 12 flesh and blood pills, giving 1 of each to every refugee. The refugees stared at the pungent, foul-smelling pills, hesitant to even take a bite, except for Shirtu, who didn't hesitate for a second. The boy tossed both pills into his mouth. Seeing this, a sturdy man named Li Daju grabbed his own pair and shoved them in 2. "Damn it, this has to be better than eating leaves and bugs," Daju muttered. He had been on the verge of fainting from hunger. Suddenly, a warm sensation flooded his stomach and his legs stopped shaking. But before he could finish his sentence, Daju's withered, straw-like hair began to grow rapidly, and his emaciated body started to expand and fill out. He squeezed his fists in disbelief, feeling raw power surging through his muscles, and let out an excited shout. "Divine grace, this must be a miracle medicine." At those words, the remaining refugees cast aside their hesitation. They scrambled to swallow the pills, and for a moment, the sounds of coughing and gasping mixed together around the stone pot. Their loose skin tightened and color returned to their sunken cheeks. But right then, something unexpected happened. Our protagonist watched in shock. He couldn't help but wonder how a mere child could trigger such a celestial phenomenon. It was almost as if the boy were the true main character of this story. After a long silence, the phantom image of a ghostly blade hovering over Shida's head slowly faded away. The boy instinctively clenched his fists. His bones emitted a series of sharp, crackling pops. The boy, who had once been as thin as a rail, now possessed muscles that rippled with strength, looking for all the world like a miniature powerhouse. He quietly took note of this remarkable child before signaling the ghost fire to distribute tools to the rest of the group. Once the tools were handed out, he had the skeleton strike a tree several times until the massive trunk finally toppled over. The ghost fire moved in with perfect timing to break the wood down, successfully producing 1 unit of ordinary timber. And so, we see him demonstrate the process, striking a tree with just a fraction of his strength to show them how it's done. He continued to strike the trunk, using only a tiny bit of power, making the task look deceptively simple to the onlookers. With each measured blow, he repeated the action, proving that even a small amount of force could bring down a giant. Once the tree fell, he immediately signaled his skeleton to give Shirtu a literal thumbs up as a sign of approval. The boy's intuition was truly impressive. He clearly had a sharp eye for work and the potential to be an excellent laborer. That simple gesture from the skeleton gave Shirtu a massive boost of confidence, and he quickly picked up an axe from the ground. He headed straight for another tree, while Daju, the leader of the group, shouldered his own axe with newfound vigor. Daju promised to handle everything, claiming that as the former village woodcutter, he was a true professional at this. A dark-faced man nearby chimed in, echoing the sentiment, and with those 2 leading the way, the others followed suit. The remaining villagers picked up their tools one by one, encouraged by the dark-faced man's enthusiastic support. He insisted he was just as capable, and seeing their leaders take charge, the rest of the refugees grabbed whatever they could find. They rushed toward the trees, and our protagonist watched the scene with great satisfaction. They were certainly full of spirit. Suddenly, he had a group of high-quality workers at his disposal. Those expensive pills were clearly a worthwhile investment. Next, he directed the skeleton to clear 5 more trees and 5 boulders, preparing to return to the ghost realm with the iron ore. He planned to take everything out at once, which would finally allow him to unlock the next stage and complete the tutorial task. However, during the brief moment he returned to the ghost realm, the sound of metal slicing through the air echoed from the woods. A series of sharp cracks followed as Shirtu, axe in hand, delivered a powerful horizontal strike against a massive trunk. A sharp blade of energy instantly sliced through a whole row of trees. Shirtu dropped the axe, staring at his palms in total shock. He wondered if this power was truly his, feeling a strange energy surging through his body ever since he swallowed those pills. To his bewilderment, several cultivation techniques and combat skills were even beginning to manifest automatically within his mind. Old Zhao, being the eldest and most experienced among them, immediately recognized the phenomenon for what it was, the drawing of qi into the body. It was the external release of spiritual energy, a feat rarely seen by common folk. This meant Shirtu had become like the immortals of Bayou City, a realization that made the boy's heart tremble with pure excitement. He was certain this power was a gift from his master, and he threw himself onto his knees where the skeleton had recently stood. Shirtu thanked the master for granting him divine strength, vowing to follow him faithfully for all eternity. The others followed suit, kneeling in deep reverence. Li Daju even swore to work like an ox for the master for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, our protagonist returned from the ghost realm with the iron ore, only to find the entire group bowing and scraping once again. He felt a bit overwhelmed. He had only looked away for a moment, and yet they were back to kneeling instead of cutting trees. Just as he was about to urge his workers back to task, his sharp eyes caught something unusual among the pile of ordinary timber. A piece of wood glowing with a faint green light was hidden there, and as he focused on it, the system panel flickered into view. It was emerald jade wood, a fifth-tier heavenly treasure capable of nourishing wood attributes' spiritual roots below the void stage. It could also be used to unlock structures like spiritual fields and medicine gardens, so he had the skeleton pick up the glowing timber. To be honest, finding a fifth-tier treasure while still being a mere novice was quite the stroke of luck. He felt as though he were in a dream. Such immense wealth falling into his lap seemed almost too good to be true. He instinctively began to survey the surroundings, wondering if this place of abundant wood energy truly referred to the dead man's forest. A look of doubt crossed his face, as this was merely the edge of the forest where even the weeds were pathetically sparse. Calling this a land of abundant energy felt like an insult to his intelligence, but if the environment wasn't the cause, there was only one other option. The source of the treasure had to be the villagers themselves, so he shifted his perspective back to the skeleton to investigate. He began to observe each villager closely, determined to find out which one of them had delivered such a magnificent surprise. After a bit of questioning, a nervous Li Daju began to recount the events that had transpired while the master was away. As he listened to the story of where the wood came from, he couldn't help but feel a mix of disbelief and amusement. They had actually stumbled upon a fifth-tier heavenly treasure just by cutting trees. These people were true talents, he realized. After accepting the emerald jade wood, he began to consider how to properly reward those who made such outstanding contributions. He knew he had to strengthen them, as they were the high-quality workers who would drive his future production. To begin their development, he exchanged more points for rewards. He produced 2 blood-drinking pills and 2 flesh-and-blood pills, placing them directly into the hands of Shirtu and Li Daju. The 2 men swallowed the pills without a moment's hesitation, and soon after, Shirtu's flesh and blood energy surged to just over 8 points. Li Daju's energy also climbed, nearing the 2-point mark. This sight, naturally, immediately sparked a wave of envy among the other villagers. A new fire of determination lit up in their eyes as they told themselves they must work harder for the master. Over the next 7 days, our protagonist's land-clearing business proceeded in full swing, and the materials in his warehouse soon surpassed the 4-digit mark. During those few days, he finished constructing the water well, completing the second task of the novice tutorial and earning 2 heaven-mending stones as a reward. His eyes lit up as he read the description of the heaven-mending stones. These were truly incredible items, essentially wildcards for his inventory. They could be used as a substitute for any material below the 8th tier. Next, he turned his attention toward the Hutu spiritual fields. With this structure, most crops could be harvested daily after accelerated growth, which would solve his food problem once and for all. It would also allow him to cultivate various spiritual herbs, a prospect he found well worth the investment. With his mind made up, he clicked to build. A plot of fertile land manifested out of thin air on the empty ground. And just then, Li Daju arrived to present him with yet another treasure. He took the item and saw it was a piece of 3rd-tier bloodvein wood, a discovery he took very seriously indeed. Even if the bloodvein wood wasn't as high-ranking as the emerald jade, it proved the boy was truly working hard. With a generous wave of his hand, he rewarded him with 1 blood-drinking pill and 1 flesh-and-blood pill. Li Daju's grin was so wide it practically reached his ears. He made sure to show off to the other villagers before happily swallowing the pills. At that moment, the task panel flickered to life once again. A side quest had been triggered. It seemed some demons were currently eyeing his livestock, the villagers he was so carefully raising. The system urged him to head to Sherdeng village to display the might of an evil god and punish the meat thieves. The objective, slay the demons. The rewards would be determined by his performance, and he hadn't expected to trigger another side quest so quickly. Since he knew very little about these demons, he decided that caution was, naturally, the best course of action. A faint, blood-red light flickered in his eyes as the cold aura surrounding him surged instantly. At that very moment, he felt his power rising rapidly, his ghost domain expanding tenfold in the blink of an eye as his abilities grew stronger. He realized he could now cause any living creature caught within his domain to suffer from vivid hallucinations. His authority over the Chan ghosts also expanded, unlocking 10 additional slots for ghost servants and 1 for a ghost general. The limit for bone materials used in bone summons increased to 500. The more material used, the stronger the ghost. This meant he could summon far more powerful entities, and he slowly exhaled a breath of turbid air. Once he stabilized the surging energy within his body, he turned his attention back to the side quest and rubbed his temples. He wondered how to best complete the task until a sudden spark of inspiration hit him. He was the boss now. Work, he reasoned, should be done by employees, and his talent was already remarkably high. All he needed to do was provide the boy with better weapons, so he immediately purchased a bone sword and armor. Next, he used the bloodvein wood to craft a wooden tablet, sealing the bone summoning spell directly inside it. He maximized the summoning materials just in case Shirtu couldn't handle the monsters alone. Meanwhile, at the edge of the forest, Shirtu was busy swinging his sword to cut wood when, quite suddenly, the light around him began to dim. The chatter of the villagers and the clanging of tools faded into the distance. Not long after, a silvery white figure slowly manifested before Shida's eyes. One look was enough for the boy to be absolutely certain. This was his great deity. Without a moment's hesitation, he dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead against the void. He offered his greetings, while our protagonist carefully chose his words to ensure his image remained sufficiently imposing. He spoke of demons haunting the land and warned that the ignorant Sherdang village was about to face a supernatural disaster. When asked if he was willing to eliminate evil, Shida's gaze became incredibly firm as he vowed to serve even at the cost of his life. The moment he finished speaking, the surrounding darkness receded like a tide, and the warm sunlight began to spill over him once more. The voices of the villagers returned to clarity. Shirtu remained kneeling, though several new items had appeared by his side, gifts from his deity. He tucked them carefully into his robes, then took the 2 medicinal pills and swallowed them without a second thought. A familiar warmth spread through his body, increasing his strength, and he immediately began relaying the great deity's warnings to his followers. The crowd was shaken by the news, and Widow Li, with tears in her eyes, pulled Shirtu into a tight, emotional embrace. She told him that if he went, he must kill the demons well and not embarrass the great deity. If you return missing even a single hair, I'll skin you alive myself, she threatened. Shirtu, his eyes welling with tears, nodded firmly and promised his mother he understood. Li Daju stepped out from the crowd, offering his great strength to accompany Shirtu and lend a hand on the journey ahead. A dark-faced man followed suit, echoing the sentiment, and soon the 3 of them set off towards Sherdang village, weapons in hand. We move now to Sherdang village, where Li Daju and the others arrived quickly. The locals there recognized them almost immediately, knowing they were from neighboring Daliang village. As they were welcomed in, Shirtu shared the great deity's warning with the people. But the villagers simply didn't believe him. After all, Sherdang village was under the protection of the prestigious White Jade City. They believed the immortal lords of that city were far too powerful for any demon to dare appear here. However, as we shall see, on their 3rd day in the village, 2 young men came sprinting toward the house of Uncle Lu, shouting in absolute terror. The Wu family's child had been snatched by a snake demon under the old locust tree. Uncle Lu was so terrified he nearly collapsed. He frantically called for the villagers to help, and as the news spread, the entire community was instantly plunged into a state of panic. Though they grabbed their farming tools and knives, not a single soul dared to actually run toward the eastern edge of the village. In the midst of this chaos, Shirtu and his 2 companions, now fully armed, rushed toward the locust tree to face the threat. There, coiled around the trunk, was a black snake as thick as a water bucket, its tongue flickering as it hissed at the world. The Wu family's child was coiled tightly in midair, his small face turning purple as he struggled to draw a single breath. The giant snake seemed to savor the moment, preparing to swallow the boy. Younger humans always did taste better, after all. Their leader had brought over a dozen snake demons this time. With so few villagers, there hardly seemed enough to share. Just then, Shirtu arrived and let out a thunderous roar, calling the creature a vile beast before charging forward like a sharpened blade. The black snake whipped its head around, its eyes gleaming with a savage light as it sized up this new, self-delivered snack. This boy looked sturdy, which meant his meat would be much more satisfying to chew, and with that, the snake lunged at Shirtu. The villagers cried out in horror at the sight, their leader clenching his fists as his heart leaped into his throat. But in the next heartbeat, everyone froze. Shirtu didn't retreat, but instead pressed forward, his bone sword radiating a chilling energy. With a single horizontal sweep, the black snake's head went rolling across the ground. It was a clean, decisive strike. The entirety of Sherdang village fell into a deathly silence. It took a long moment before a villager finally spoke in a trembling voice. That demon was thicker than a water bucket, yet Shirtu killed it with one blow. That sword light looked just like the stories. It looked exactly like an immortal cultivator slaying a demon. Could he truly be a master? Soon, gasps of wonder broke the silence. The looks the villagers gave Shirtu shifted from doubt to absolute awe. But beneath the old locust tree, the air remained heavy. The metallic scent of the demon's blood was carried far by the wind, and Shirtu noticed something unsettling in the direction it blew. He could hear faint, rustling sounds drawing closer to the village. Seeing this, the villagers' brief moment of relief vanished instantly. Their nerves were stretched to the breaking point. Someone looked toward the woods, their face turning pale as they gasped, "What is that?" The trees and grass began to shake violently as dozens of black snakes emerged, quickly surrounding the entire village. At the front of the pack, a massive serpent, far larger and more imposing than the first, slithered slowly into the clearing. Its eyes locked onto Shirtu. It hissed that a mere chi-refining cultivator dared to touch the subordinates of Nyeshi. The beast claimed it had ruled Huguang Ridge for years, and Shirtu was the first to defy it. Shirtu simply gripped his bone sword tighter. Cold sweat instantly soaked Shirtu's back, as the aura of this giant serpent was far stronger than the last. He could feel it clearly. This demon's flesh and blood energy was at least 10 times his own. The snake demon flicked its tongue, savoring Shirtu's scent. It hissed about his rich energy, deciding to swallow him to both avenge its kin and nourish itself. And then, Nyeshi struck. With a sudden, violent whip of its tail, the creature smashed into the village's earthen wall, causing half of it to collapse instantly. Shirtu gritted his teeth and held his bone sword steady, refusing to retreat. He claimed he was protected by a god. Nyeshi burst into a mocking laugh, his voice dripping with disdain. To him, the idea of gods in this world was a joke. He dismissed them as mere low-level spirits and ghosts, declaring that if he decided Shirtu was to die, then he was dead. The beast roared that nothing could save him now, opening its massive, bloody maw as a foul-smelling gale swept towards Shirtu. Simultaneously, dozens of black snakes lunged at the villagers. It seemed Shirtu was about to be swallowed whole by the giant serpent. Suddenly, a warm sensation radiated from his chest. We see the blood-veined wooden tablet fly out from Shidu's robes. It hovered in midair, emitting a faint white glow. In an instant, a chilling, ghostly wind began to howl through the village. Black death energy spilled from the tablet like ink in water, snaking and winding its way across the ground. Watching this, Nyeshi instinctively felt a surge of lethal danger, yet he maintained his arrogant front, for now, at least. He demanded to know who was playing tricks and vowed to swallow them whole, stretching his massive jaws to their absolute limit. The gale from his mouth rushed toward Shirtu, but the moment it touched the faint light of the tablet, something happened. The wind was violently shattered by the death energy. At that same moment, as the darkness touched the earth, a skeletal figure slowly stepped out from within the shimmering light. A perfectly ordinary Tuesday, in other words. In the next second, all movement in Sherdang village seemed to hit a pause button. The snake demon's roaring stopped instantly. The villagers' screams died away. Inside, Nyeshi was panicking, recognizing this as a vile seed his father had warned him about. These seeds were the most unique existences in the world, far beyond what any normal creature could resist. They could even infect others. They could even enslave every living soul. If one was unfortunate enough to encounter them, the only way to survive was to run. Nyeshi had never taken those warnings to heart before, but in this moment, he realized that children really should listen to their fathers. All of Nyeshi's previous arrogance had vanished. He curled himself into a tight, trembling ball, shivering with pure terror. On the other side, Li Daju and the dark-faced man watched the skeleton emerge from a distance, their faces filled with joy and excitement. The two of them knelt on the ground, shouting greetings to the great god. The villagers of Sherdang village were, naturally, utterly shocked. So this was the god they spoke of. Just by standing there, the figure had completely paralyzed dozens of demons with fear. The divine pressure was truly terrifying. Most of the villagers quickly followed suit and knelt, repeating whatever Li Deju muttered under his breath. They chanted along with him, but in the crowd, a young girl's eyes sparkled. She saw something behind the skeleton. A hazy, shadowy figure seemed to loom behind the bones. Hong Ling whispered to herself, wondering if that was the true form of the god. She told herself that if she ever had the chance, she would visit the dead man's tomb. Meanwhile, the scene shifted. We see the skeleton scanning the surroundings. It seemed the young boy, Shirtu, had actually done quite a good job on his own. To be honest, killing a snake demon by himself was impressive. This child had the talent and temperament worth nurturing for the future. He was, in other words, prime material for a dedicated worker. The skeleton reached out and patted Shidu's head in a silent gesture of encouragement. Nyeshi noticed that the entity wasn't paying him any attention at all, and deep down, he felt a surge of wild joy. He assumed the vile seed preferred the taste of human blood, which he took as good news for his own survival. He coiled himself even tighter, hoping to slip away unnoticed while the entity began its inevitable slaughter of the humans. But Nyeshi's beautiful dream was not meant to be. He watched in confusion as the entity did not kill the humans in front of it. Instead, it began walking toward him step by step. Looking down at the field of snake demons, the entity found them pitifully weak. Most of these demons had energy levels that were barely worth mentioning, and even the largest one didn't even reach 200. Still, collecting them all would provide a decent amount of materials. With that thought, the skeleton slowly raised its arm. Across from him, Nyeshi saw the inevitable and immediately begged for mercy, crying out that he was still just a young demon. He claimed he had no idea this was the great god's territory and hadn't meant to offend, pleading for his life to be spared. The demon even offered to serve as a beast of burden, but the skeleton ignored his pleas entirely and continued to approach him step by step. Panicking, Nyeshi shouted that his father was Nya Hailong of Huguang Ridge, a powerful being who had reached the peak of the second rank. He begged for a chance, offering to lead the entity to Huguang Ridge, claiming his own father's flesh and blood would surely aid the great god's cultivation. It seemed the boy was quite the devoted son, in his own twisted way. With a silent, mocking air, the skeleton simply swung its arm. The skeletal palm pierced straight through the snake demon's head in an instant, and the light slowly faded from Nyeshi's terrified eyes. Finally, the demon lost all signs of life. Without a moment's pause, the entity controlled the skeletal hand with another swift wave. The death energy gathered in its palm surged toward the remaining snake demons, and in just a few breaths, the threat was neutralized. The dozens of demons that had surrounded the village were now nothing but corpses, leaving the people of Sherdang village staring in utter disbelief. This, they realized, was the true power of a god, wiping out a demonic horde without breaking a sweat. The entity scanned the field of carcasses. He glanced at the fanatical expression on Shida's face and decided there was no need to worry about the aftermath or the precious materials left behind. The young boy would surely bring them back for him. With that, the skeleton turned and flew toward the blood-patterned wooden tablet floating in the air. As the skeletal form approached the tablet, it transformed into black mist and merged within, causing the tablet's glow to slowly dim. The wood drifted back into Shidu's arms, and seeing this, the villagers erupted into a sudden, joyous cheer that a god had truly saved them. They celebrated their new protector, believing they would never have to fear demons again, while Shirtu gripped the tablet tightly to his chest. His mission was complete, and the people of Sherdang village were safe. It was time to return to the dead man's forest to report back. He bowed respectfully to the villagers, telling his elders and neighbors that since the disaster was over, he had to take his leave. As he spoke, Hong Ling suddenly rushed out from the crowd and blocked his path, insisting that she wanted to go with him. The villagers were stunned by her words, and someone quickly pulled at her sleeve, asking if she had completely lost her mind. The villagers reminded her that she was meant to join the Baiyu sect next year, where she would finally become a respected immortal master. They argued she would never have to fear demons again, but Hong Ling interrupted them, declaring she no longer cared for the Baiyu sect. To her, the protection of the Baiyu immortals was unreliable. Only the great god's power was real, and she wasn't the only one who felt this way. She insisted on seeing the great god, and soon another villager stepped forward, telling Shirtu that he wanted to go along as well. He wanted to travel to the dead man's forest to worship the great god, though a small group of villagers still refused to leave their homes. Some remained loyal to the Bayou Immortals, while others simply couldn't bear the thought of abandoning their ancestral lands. Watching the scene unfold, Li Daju smiled and patted Shirtu on the shoulder, noting that quite a few people were ready to follow them back. He suggested they shouldn't delay any longer and should set out immediately, lest they keep the great god waiting. The dark-faced man stepped forward eagerly, reminding everyone to bring the snake demon carcasses since they had plenty of hands to help now. With everyone pitching in, Sherding village became a hive of activity. Meanwhile, we returned to the ghost domain to see what has changed. The entity immediately opened the construction panel, selecting both the Inwind Forest and the Wailing Mine to begin their creation. In the next instant, over 100 twisted, gnarled trees burst forth from the soil of the Dead Man's Forest, reaching toward the dark sky. At another empty site, massive stones churned and rose into a high mound, its peak splitting open to reveal a dark, gaping entrance. With these two special buildings successfully completed, a few days passed until Shirtu finally returned with the people of Sherding village. The entity immediately settled the rewards, earning an Earth-grade lottery ticket, a development that put him in an excellent mood. He tucked the ticket into his inventory for later and turned his attention toward the newly arrived villagers standing before him. He knew that the sooner he assigned them to their posts, the sooner they could begin producing materials. With a grand wave of his hand, countless first-rank blood addiction and flesh and blood pills flew out from the ghost domain, landing directly into the hands of the villagers. The newcomers stared at the mysterious pills, hesitant to consume them, but Hongling noticed something as she held the medicine. She saw the envy and longing in the eyes of the original Daliang villagers. After a moment of quiet reflection, she glanced over at Shirtu. She asked Shirtu if this was the divine gift he had mentioned on the road, and he nodded, confirming it was exactly that. He urged her to eat the good medicine, and without a second thought, Hongling swallowed the foul-smelling pill. Seeing her lead the way, the others followed suit, and the moment the pills hit their stomachs, their frail bodies began to change. Their muscles filled out before our very eyes, but Hongling's reaction was the most dramatic as rays of light pierced through her. The glow cut through the gloom of the Dead Man's Forest, accompanied by the ethereal, soft chirping of emerald birds. From within the ghost domain, the entity watched the display with great interest. Yet another heavenly phenomenon, it seemed. He wondered if people capable of triggering such omens were simply common occurrences in the logic of this world. It turned out the young girl had real potential, and he decided that such a promising talent deserved a bit of special attention. He exchanged points for 4 more pills and sent them into her hands, which Hongling swallowed immediately. The power within her surged once more, and deep down, she began to feel an inexplicable connection to the flow of spiritual energy. She turned her gaze toward the white-clad figure floating in midair, her keen senses picking up on his presence. While the others were lost in the joy of their restored health, not a single one of them noticed the pale shadow above. The figure remained suspended in the air. It seemed ordinary people were not destined to gaze upon the great god's face, but she could. This discovery filled Hongling with a secret, quiet joy. Sensing the girl's gaze, the entity raised an eyebrow in surprise. He realized she could actually see him, and upon hearing his voice, Hongling knelt on the ground without a moment's hesitation. He noted that with her extraordinary talent and steady heart, she was destined to become a peerless power one day. He commanded her to practice diligently day and night, and not to fail his divine decree, to which she bowed deeply in worship. She promised to obey his will, but as she rose, she looked at him eagerly, asking what they could do for him right now. He hadn't expected her to be so enthusiastic about manual labor, so he ordered the ghost fires to dismantle a snake demon carcass. He distributed dozens of portions of meat, telling them to eat their fill first, for work would begin once their hunger was satisfied. He told them to return to the mines and simply do their best. Hongling was left utterly speechless by his words. The great god actually wanted them to eat their fill before working, without even setting a quota. It seemed that in this world, such a benevolent deity truly did exist. The people of Daliang village received the fresh meat and immediately began to cook. The villagers from Sherdang stepped forward to help, and before long, a spiritual aroma began to waft from the stone pots. In an instant, the Sherdang villagers were overwhelmed. They wondered if meat had always smelled this incredible. They marveled at the glistening white rice, wondering how such a thing could even be grown. Meanwhile, Widow Li barked out an order. She told them to stop shouting and eat quickly so they could get to work and not waste the great god's mercy. The villagers nodded in agreement and began to eat heartily. Once everyone was finally full and satisfied, we see him open the panels for the Inwind Field and Wailing Mine, assigning each of the new villagers to their tasks. With that settled, he began to organize the rewards from the limited mission, first dismantling the original bone tongue. Using 49 portions of snake bone and essence blood, he summoned a brand new bone tongue ghost jar. Based on the material conversion ratio, this new bone tongue possessed the strength of 1,000 ordinary bone materials. It was now the strongest force under his command. At the same time, the shop unlocked a new item for him. The plain soul pill was now available, and 5 other items had been upgraded to Tier 2, requiring 5 corresponding materials each. He realized then that working hard for half a month didn't compare to slaying a few massive demonic beasts. It seemed he would have to find an opportunity to wipe out Foxlight Ridge in one fell swoop. By then, the progress for the Shadow Collection trap should be complete. He quietly made his decision. He planned to let his followers rest for 2 days before having Shirtu and Hongling lead a raid on the snake demon's nest. With that in mind, he turned his attention to the Earth-grade lottery ticket and clicked to start the draw. Countless high-level items flashed across the panel before finally stopping on a building radiating a mysterious, eerie aura. In the blink of an eye, a structure materialized beside the bone altar. He had unlocked a special building, the Spirit Command Platform. Its first function, the domain of 10,000 graces, could slowly enhance the strength of any evil entities within ordinary buildings. The second function was the bone-knocking decree, which allowed him to temporarily control a target by offering a piece of its essence. Since this was his first time unlocking a special building, he was granted one free use of the bone-knocking decree. He examined the spirit command platform for a long while, thinking to himself that it was indeed worthy of being a special building. It possessed two unique abilities, though he noted that the second one carried a fair amount of risk. If the summoned target exceeded the 6th rank, it would not be bound by the platform's constraints at all. In that case, it would be no different from seeking death. He decided to be cautious, but as for the free trial from the system, there was really no reason to hesitate. He stopped overthinking and activated the bone-knocking decree. A second later, the orchid-colored flames atop the ancient pillars shot up 3 feet high, and a gray shadow flickered within the fire. A sharp, sizzling sound echoed from the flames, and a black crack suddenly split open one of the ancient pillars. A tiny mouse lunged out from the rift, shouting to ask which reckless fool dared to drag it to such a ghostly place. The mouse's crimson eyes scanned the surroundings, looking quite agitated for something so small. Finally, its gaze fixed on the direction of his spiritual body, its shrill voice full of arrogance and defiance. It demanded to know if he was the one messing around, dragging the great mouse out of its burrow. It seemed the mouse thought he was tired of living. Looking at this peanut-sized mouse demon, he found the situation rather amusing and decided to tease it with a cold, menacing tone. He remarked that for a mere rat spirit, it certainly had quite the ego. Hearing this, the little mouse stood up on its hind legs. It tilted its head back and began to curse shrilly, claiming that his entire family were the real rat spirits. It took great offense at being compared to low-level monsters, insisting that it was actually a great demon. The little creature was nearly dying of anger. He raised an eyebrow, wondering what a demon was compared to a wicked god like himself. The mouse suddenly burst into a shrill, mocking laugh upon hearing him call himself a wicked god. A wicked god? Huh, how amusing. The creature claimed that in its 300 years of life, it had never seen a mere evil remnant with its own consciousness. It mocked his audacity for claiming divinity, but as it tried to take a few steps back, something felt very wrong. The mouse realized it couldn't move an inch. It began to struggle frantically, yet its tiny body remained completely rooted to the spot. A flicker of genuine panic finally crossed its eyes. You evil remnant. It demanded to know what sort of ghost technique he had used to bind the great mouse. He simply smiled, noting it had forgotten one detail. He informed the creature that from the very moment it was summoned, it belonged to him. The mouse froze in disbelief. It looked down at the dark mist swirling around its paws, then up at the eerie orchid flames flickering atop the platform. Its expression slowly collapsed as it realized the cursed power within those flames was resonating perfectly with the black mist. The mouse cursed him for playing dirty, declaring that the great mouse would never acknowledge such a pathetic, forced binding. With a defiant huff, it tried to summon its demonic energy, and a faint, dark green glow began to emerge from its tiny body. However, the moment the energy appeared, the black mist absorbed most of it. After a futile struggle, the mouse finally seemed to deflate. Its tail drooped, and its crimson eyes were filled with resentment as the surrounding black mist slowly began to dissipate. And here we see the system notification appear. He had successfully acquired a 5th-rank ghost soldier, the righteous mouse. He looked at the little creature with wide eyes, genuinely surprised that such a small demon could possess such decent strength. To be honest, its size was quite deceiving. Hearing his comment, the righteous mouse pulled a very sour face. It insisted once more that it was a great demon, not a common spirit, but he simply ignored the protest and changed the subject. He pointed out that since it now belonged to him, it might as well work for him in exchange for a future of wealth and glory. To sweeten the deal, he produced 2 second-rank blood flesh pills. Seeing this, the righteous mouse simply flopped onto its back. It flatly refused to be ordered around, deciding that if it couldn't leave, it would simply lie there and do absolutely nothing. The mouse mocked him, asking what he could possibly do to it, but he didn't get angry at the taunts. After all, he hadn't expected much yet. He knew that a few blood flesh pills wouldn't be enough to control a 5th-rank demon, so he decided to take things slowly with the righteous mouse. For now, it would simply be a way to pass the time. Over the next 3 days, he remained peacefully within the ghost prison. We see the new villagers working diligently to produce materials, and as the warehouse resources grew steadily, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. During this time, Hongling fully demonstrated his management talents by handling the distribution of supplies for over 100 people. From scheduling rest to rotating work shifts, everything was organized perfectly, which, to be honest, saved him a great deal of trouble. Having appointed Hongling as the acting village chief, he left the ghost prison on the 4th morning to personally inspect the ongoing work. As he approached the forest, he felt something tugging at his leg. Looking down, he was surprised to find the righteous mouse clinging to him. The little mouse's tail was drooping, yet its face still wore that same defiant and rebellious expression we've come to expect. It complained about being bored to death in that rotten place, and declared that the great mouse was coming out for some fresh air. It followed behind him, peering curiously at everything in sight, until the quiet morning was suddenly interrupted by a sound. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the distance, and he turned his gaze toward the source of the noise. 2 villagers carrying hoes appeared from the spirit fields, and the mouse was shocked to see that humans were actually living here. A murderous glint flashed in its crimson eyes as it cursed the fact that other creatures dared to exist on the great mouse's turf. Dark green demonic energy began to surge from its tiny body as it prepared to attack the unsuspecting workers. However, in the very next second, he pinned the creature down firmly. Furious, the mouse let out a high-pitched, indignant roar. It screamed, asking who he thought he was to touch the great mouse, threatening to make his skin rot right down to the bone. The two villagers turned pale with fright at the sound of the voice and immediately began to stumble backward in terror. Other workers nearby gathered around to see the commotion, whispering in disbelief that a mere mouse was actually speaking like a person. They marveled at the spirit fields granted by their deity, concluding that even the grain-stealing mice here must be magical spirits. The mouse was becoming even more enraged, screaming that these lowly insects were going to be the death of him for such an insult. It was about to let out another string of lies when Hong Ling quickly stepped out from the crowd, his gaze sweeping across the scene. The moment he caught sight of the hazy, white-robed figure standing behind the mouse, he immediately dropped to his knees in greeting. The villagers couldn't see our protagonist themselves, but they all knew that Hong Ling had the divine gift to behold the deity's presence. Following his lead, the crowd hastily knelt as well, and he raised a hand to signal Hong Ling to rise, telling him all was well. He explained that this creature was called Ishu and was merely ignorant of the world, so there was no need for them to fear it. Hong Ling acknowledged the command loudly and immediately relayed the divine will to the people, declaring the mouse a messenger of the gods. He told them it was an auspicious sign, and that from now on, seeing this mouse was the same as seeing the deity himself. Upon hearing this, the crowd began to bow fervently toward Ishu, their voices rising in a chorus of respect for the great Lord Mouse. Ishu looked utterly bewildered, wondering if he truly looked like an auspicious sign after all the years he had been alive. It was, to be honest, the very first time anyone had ever called a rat a blessing, and its bristling fur began to smooth down. Its tail curled up with pride as it slowly lost itself in the waves of praise, feeling quite satisfied with this newfound status. Even the way it looked at Hong Ling became much friendlier, while our protagonist watched the mouse's smug expression with some surprise. He had been prepared for a long, drawn-out psychological battle, never imagining that a single sentence from Hong Ling would win the mouse over. He marveled at how easy the creature was to win over, grateful that he could rely on Hong Ling's intuition before giving his next order. He revealed that the location of the snake demon remnants had been found at Huang Ridge and told Hong Ling to prepare for a move. He commanded him to take Shirtu to the ridge and wipe out the remaining demons, and as he spoke, a gift appeared. A glow wrapped in deathly energy drifted toward Hong Ling, containing 8 second-rank blood shadow and blood flesh pills. He also provided 2 sets of second-rank bone armor and swords, telling them to use these items to strengthen themselves first. Hong Ling caught the pills and bowed deeply, vowing that he would eliminate every last snake demon and never betray the deity's trust. Beside him, Shirtu also reached out to take the pills, and as they both absorbed the medicinal effects, their internal energy began to surge rapidly. They successfully broke through the 100-unit flesh energy mark to reach level 2. Having finished this, our protagonist gave the lounging Ishu a little kick. Ishu looked up in a huff, asking how he dared to be so bold with the great Lord Mouse, just as his little followers were heading out. When asked if he wasn't going along, the mouse told him to stop dreaming, as he had no intention of working for free, though our protagonist remained unfazed. With a hint of deliberate pity, he reminded the mouse that as an auspicious sign, it would look quite bad if the big brother hid while the underlings faced danger. The mouse's paws paused at those words. He agreed to go, but only on the condition that he was only responsible for protecting the girl. He made it clear that if the little boy happened to die, our protagonist shouldn't think of blaming him for the misfortune. With a heavy sigh, he flopped onto the ground, his tail twitching listlessly as he lamented his fate of working for a black-hearted boss. Our protagonist simply nodded with a smile, which made Ishu feel that something was slightly off, even if he couldn't quite put his paw on it. The mouse hesitated, asking once more if he truly was an auspicious sign, and if he was being lied to, which, naturally, was a very fair question. He was reassured that he wasn't being deceived, and after a moment of deep thought, Ishu decided he wanted to hear more details upon his return. He claimed he wasn't actually that interested in hearing the praise, of course. He just wanted to verify if the claims were true or false. Our protagonist agreed, and before long, we see that Hong Ling and Shirtu had finished packing their things for the journey ahead. The two of them bowed deeply toward the unseen deity one last time before setting off on their long trek. Ishu lay lazily across Hong Ling's shoulder, his small paws clutching a piece of roasted dried meat given to him by the grateful villagers. The trio left the dead man's forest behind, and following their instructions, Hong Ling decided to head for the docks of Bayou City first. They planned to take the waterway to Huang Ridge, but the moment they reached the gates of Bayou City, the sight before them made Shirtu stop in his tracks. The open ground outside the city gates was crowded with refugees in tattered clothes, most of them reduced to little more than skin and bone. Seeing them wrapped in nothing but ruined straw, Shirtu felt his eyes grow hot with tears, knowing all too well how cheap life was in these chaotic times. It was a common enough tragedy, yet Shirtu couldn't help but instinctively reach for the bag of dry rations hanging at his waist. He wanted to share his rations with the children, but Hong Ling suddenly pulled him back, warning him that giving them food now would be a mistake. It would only trigger a desperate scramble among the crowd. If a riot broke out, they wouldn't save anyone and would only jeopardize their master's mission. Shirtu froze, arguing that they couldn't just watch them starve to death, but Hong Ling simply shook her head with a heavy heart. She explained it wasn't about being heartless, but about their own limitations, as he only had a single bag of food to offer. She asked him if a child could even protect themselves in this sea of refugees once they had food. Hearing this, Shirtu gripped his bag tightly. A wave of unspeakable bitterness washed over him. He understood the logic, yet he found it impossible to remain truly indifferent to their suffering. At that moment, Ishu shifted into a more comfortable position on Hong Ling's shoulder, muttering that humans were simply too much trouble. Hong Ling tilted her head slightly, asking the great lord for his wisdom, to which he replied they should simply mind their own business. Or rather, what the mouse meant was that their deity surely had his own plans, a thought that made the two companions exchange a knowing look. They found themselves in complete agreement with this idea, noting that protecting the world required a sense of priority and balance. Their deity had sent them to Huguang Ridge to slay the serpent demon specifically to prevent more villages from being slaughtered and destroyed. To prevent more people from becoming refugees, Hongling and Shitu moved past the encampment and finally entered the gates of Bayou City. Shortly after, we see them heading straight for the docks to find a boat for Huguang Ridge, where, at the very heart of the ridge, the demon Nia Hailong was coiled upon the central path, his crimson eyes fixed on the lesser serpents as he urged them to hurry up. He barked at them for loitering, demanding they enter the formation immediately, while his mate helped organize their many offspring. She asked if such haste was truly necessary, suggesting they take their time since the formation was still incomplete, but Nia Hailong merely glared at her. He snapped that she understood nothing, reminding her that that day was fast approaching. During his recent trip to Tudao County, he had discovered that the evil fragments were already showing signs of awakening, despite him devouring everyone in Sherdang village who knew the truth. He was certain that old Ghost Bayou must have sensed something as well, and that old man was notoriously cunning and treacherous. He insisted that they had to prepare the spirit veins of Huguang Ridge early, as they couldn't afford to sit and wait for death. His mate could only sigh. She had no choice but to speed up, urging the serpent demons to enter the formation at the bottom of the valley, and right at that moment, a small serpent demon crawled up from the shore in a panic, crying out that 2 cultivators had arrived and were already attacking. Before the words could even settle, a sharp, piercing wave of sword chi suddenly surged from the riverbank. In an instant, a serpent demon that failed to dodge was sliced clean in half. Immediately after, a burst of flames ignited out of thin air. The fire engulfed another demon, quickly reducing it to a charred, blackened mass. A brutal end, to be sure. Then, a slightly youthful voice rang out, as Shitu announced he was there by divine order to slay the wicked demons. He commanded them to face their deaths, and with the whistling of his sword chi, several more serpents fell beneath his ancient blade. Nia Hailong glared at the 2 figures on the shore, while his mate instantly dropped her gentle facade, revealing her true, hideous form. Showing her fangs, she lunged toward the shore alongside Nia Hailong, where Shitu swung his weapon to meet them head-on. His ancient sword, infused with second-tier chi, struck Nia Hailong's head, but it only managed to leave a faint scratch on the scales. Before he could strike again, the female serpent attacked from the side, her tail snapping like a whip toward his waist. Shitu was sent flying, crashing heavily against the rocks on the shore as he coughed up a mouthful of blood. The blood stained his clothes. Seeing this, Hongling raised her hand to manifest a wall of fire for protection. She hurled a blast of flames at Nia Hailong, who only sneered, mocking the young girl for daring to play with fire in his presence. He slapped his tail against the lake's surface, sending dozens of water blades flying toward Hongling with lethal speed. Several blades grazed her arms as they whistled past, leaving deep wounds that cut right to the bone. Watching their pathetic state, Nia Hailong laughed even more wildly, mocking them for having so little actual skill. He found it hilarious that they dared to act so bold at Huguang Ridge and decided he would tear them apart since they had delivered themselves to him. After all, the flesh and blood of cultivators is a rare delicacy. But just then, a faint, calm sigh echoed through the air. The blood-patterned wooden token flew out from Shitu's robe, bursting with white light as a dark, deathly aura suddenly began to spread. A skeletal figure stepped slowly out of the radiant light, causing Nia Hailong and his mate to freeze in their tracks. Their eyes were filled with pure terror at the sight of a true Siesui, just as the ghost jade suddenly expanded. It cast a shroud over the entire lake, turning the world dark as we see the narrator glance at the wounded Shitu and Hongling. He then walked over to the spectating Ishu, picking him up by the scruff for lazily watching the show instead of working. The narrator asked if this was how he protected his juniors, while Ishu flailed his short limbs in a frantic, desperate struggle. The rat had the nerve to demand his release, grumbling that the girl was only slightly injured and certainly wasn't dead yet. He insisted he would have stepped in if things got truly fatal, while Nia Hailong stared at the floating creature in shock. His heart trembled again. He hadn't even noticed a rat hiding nearby, but what truly terrified him was something far worse. He couldn't sense the rat's rank or aura at all, which meant its strength far surpassed his own, a worrying realization, indeed. Judging it to be at least the peak of the third realm, Nia Hailong steeled his resolve to start his plan ahead of schedule. Believing a breakthrough would give him a fighting chance, he glanced at his mate and cursed her silently for being useless. Then, without warning, Nia Hailong opened his massive maw and bit clean through half of the female serpent's body. As her remaining half fell to the ground in a painful, writhing heap, the calm lake water began to ripple and churn. The water reached a boiling point as a surge of blood chi rose from the depths, flowing continuously into Nia Hailong's frame. Amidst the surging blood chi, his internal energy skyrocketed, quickly surpassing 10,000 units of flesh and blood power. Having reached the third realm, Nia Hailong stared fixedly at the skeleton and the rat with a manic, twisted smile. He declared that even a Siesui wouldn't stop him from killing everyone, a boast that only made the narrator frown in annoyance. Holding Ishu by his hind leg, the narrator simply tossed the rat toward Nia Hailong like a projectile. "Go on, little one." The moment Ishu was thrown, he let out a sharp cry of disbelief, yet he didn't seem particularly panicked by the situation. He quickly adjusted his position in midair, transforming into a streak of dark green light as he flew straight toward Nia Hailong. Just as Nia Hailong was immersing himself in the ecstasy of breaking through to the third realm, a piercing, bone-chilling pain shot through his forehead. We see a blood-red hole, 2 fingers wide, piercing straight through the giant serpent's skull as fresh blood and brain matter began to ooze out. He couldn't believe it, but before he could even finish the thought, Nia Hailong's massive body crashed to the ground, his breath gone forever. After landing, Ishu crouched to the side, desperately trying to groom his blood-stained fur while spitting out bits of flesh and gore in disgust. The rat cursed the stench, while our narrator stood his ground, calmly manipulating the skeleton, Kalu, to move forward and assist. Kulu propped up the heavily injured Shirtu and Hongling, one in each hand, as the narrator produced 2 medicinal pills for them. He tucked one into the mouth of the unconscious Shirtu. As the pill took effect, color slowly returned to the boy's pale, deathly face. Hongling, still somewhat conscious, took the pill, but a sudden wave of sorrow washed over her, and her eyes welled with tears. The narrator reached out and gently patted the top of Hongling's head, his voice carrying a soothing warmth as he told her not to worry. That simple touch instantly calmed Hongling's heart. She looked up at him, and the bitterness inside her began to slowly fade away. With Nia Hailong dead, the few remaining small snake demons didn't dare move and were easily harvested by the skeleton's blade. This allowed the narrator to sense a faint, lingering blood chi at the bottom of the lake, causing him to frown as Ishu curled his lip. It was the 9-clan blood venter array, an ancient, cliched technique that sacrifices blood relatives to extract power from their lives. Only a fool like Nia Hailong would treat such a thing like a treasure. When told to break the array, Ishu's fur bristled in annoyance. The rat was ready to complain, but he stopped short when the narrator promised to treat him to golden garlic braised snake segments later. With the mention of hibiscus steamed snake slices and salt and pepper crispy snake ribs, the rat's face immediately lit up with a greedy smile. He warned the narrator not to lie to him, and before the words even finished, Ishu transformed into a gray blur and dived into the lake. A moment later, the lake water began to vibrate violently, and hundreds of snake demon corpses floated up from the dark depths. Among them was a white snake in plain scales, her eyes shimmering with a faint pink glow. The moment she was freed, she moved. She performed a graceful roll on the water's surface, transforming into a young girl with white hair and pink eyes before kneeling down. The young demon, Xiaoxi, thanked the master for saving her life, while he watched her with a look of genuine surprise in his eyes. We see that this white snake can not only take human form, but she lacks even a single trace of bloodthirsty or malevolent aura. Instead, she radiates a spiritual energy unique to human cultivators. At that moment, the rat Ishu scurried over to join them. Ishu's eyes lit up as he stared at the white snake, realizing she was a spirit beast who didn't rely on devouring flesh. Since she cultivated using only pure energy, she could transform at the second stage, and her meat, he noted, would be quite the delicacy. Hearing this, the white snake began to tremble even more violently, while the narrator paused for a moment to consider his options. He thought about taking this rare find back to see if she could work for him. If she did well, she'd stay, and if not, well, there was always dinner. With that settled, his gaze swept over Xiaoxi, noting that while Nia Hailong was evil and had slaughtered entire villages, and even betrayed his own kin, the Bone Sovereign was here specifically to protect the human race and slay demons. Since she hadn't yet been tainted by evil and her intelligence was just blooming, he decided he could grant her a single chance. He allowed her to atone for her sins by following him, and hearing this, Xiaoxi didn't dare hesitate for even a second. She bowed her head deeply, swearing to submit to the master and serve him faithfully for the rest of her life without any second thoughts. Nearby, the few small black snakes that were still alive saw this and began to wiggle their bodies in a desperate plea. They claimed that despite being born in the mountains, their hearts were with humanity. He glanced at them and agreed to take them in too. The little black snakes wagged their tails in delight, and then the narrator turned his attention back toward Xiaoxi. He instructed Xiaoxi to carry Hongling and Shirtu, and then he looked toward the remaining black snakes with a new task. He ordered them to clear the battlefield and transport all these corpses back to the dead man's forest. Xiaoxi shifted back into her white snake form and very carefully picked up Shirtu and Hongling to carry them safely. The black snakes began picking up the bodies of their kin, and 2 of them even started a fight over who got to carry Nia Hailong. The scene had become quite absurd, to be honest, and seeing this, Ishu couldn't help but let out a mocking sneer at their cowardice. Ishu muttered that the master's heart was growing soft, questioning why he would bother protecting these low-level demons. The master glanced at him, explaining that even waste can be put to good use if one knows how. They would be perfect for mining or cutting trees, and hearing this, Ishu's eyes lit up as he nodded his small head in agreement. He remarked that the master was truly devious, which, to be honest, earned a small smile from the Bone Sovereign. We see him turn his gaze toward the white jade island shimmering in the lake, standing out vividly against the water. Sensing the pure spiritual energy radiating from it, he once again reached down and grabbed Ishu by the scruff of his neck. The rat, who had been busy licking his paws, felt a sudden sense of dread just before he heard the master's voice. He ordered Ishu to go and bring back that entire white jade island, much to the little creature's absolute dismay. Ishu bristled, complaining that he was being treated like a common pack animal right after a fight, yet he didn't dare refuse. Rolling his eyes, the rat moved reluctantly toward the lakeshore, grumbling about his master's cold and black heart. He lamented that his life mattered too, even as he opened his small mouth wide to begin the task. With a powerful pull, he actually managed to uproot the entire island from the bottom of the lake and lift it up. The system then revealed that this was blood jade, a 4th-rank treasure that greatly aids in long-term cultivation. It also contained blood jade seeds, a 6th-rank treasure that provides a massive boost to one's physical energy when consumed. After reviewing this, the master used his ghostly energy to wrap the now shrunken island and placed it on Xiaoxi's back. By now, Ishu's fur had grown dull from exhaustion, and he lay on the ground panting heavily from the effort. He kept casting resentful glances at the master, but felt slightly better seeing that everyone was being worked just as hard. As night fell and Xiaoxi's group began their journey back, the master suddenly felt a strange sensation in his brow. He caught the scent of death and wondered if another evil spirit was nearby, so he extended his divine sense to investigate. He discovered a dark shadow hiding on a cargo ship at the Fengdao County pier, and a faint smile touched his lips. He immediately ordered Shirtu and Hongling to go down and slay the thorn ghost, and so, after Nia Xiaoxi dropped them off at the pier, The two said their goodbyes before the beast swam toward the dead man's ridge with the cargo, though our master didn't actually leave. Instead, we see him following the pair from a distance, with Ishu perched motionlessly on his shoulder like a furry little statue. By this time, Hongling and Shitu had already contacted the ship's owner, Wang Er, who, as it turns out, already knew about the haunting. Wang Er decided to go with the flow, asking the two to use their arts to subdue the demon as the night grew deeper. The once calm river surface was suddenly blanketed by a thick mist, and a faint sound echoed from the deck as Hongling circulated his energy. A flicker of flame condensed in his hand, transforming into a fire talisman, before he gently pushed open the cabin door and stepped out. There, standing at the bow, was a paper man with facial features drawn in a crude, unsettling style. Its mouth was split upward in a bizarre arc, and Hongling, holding a fire talisman between his fingers, demanded to know what was haunting them. The paper man didn't respond, but its head suddenly snapped around 180 degrees, staring at him with that same eerie, smiling face. Hongling didn't hesitate, launching the fire talisman forward, yet the paper man made no move to dodge or defend itself. Its arm was ignited by the flames, but the fire was quickly extinguished by a surge of death energy as Shitu rushed out from the cabin. Shitu swung his bone sword with a heavy blow, while Hongling seized the chance to throw more talismans, wrapping the paper man in fire. Despite the blazing flames, the paper man remained standing still, acting like a target that was simply waiting for its own destruction. Inside the cabin, Wang Er summoned his courage to peek through the door that Shitu had left slightly ajar. When the firelight illuminated the paper man's face, he let out a piercing scream, recognizing it as the face of his brother, Wang San. Hongling's heart skipped a beat at the revelation, and hearing the cry, the paper man's head spun around once more to face the cabin. Wang Er collapsed in terror at the sight, and a second later, two streams of death energy erupted from within the paper figure. One stream coiled around Wang Er, while the other lunged at Hongling, and as soon as the energy touched the man, his limbs began to turn a pale, paper-like white against his will. As Wang Er struggled for help, Hongling's expression darkened. Hongling quickly hurled another fire talisman to block the energy, and just as the flames and death energy began to tangle, Nie Chaoshi, watching from the cabin roof, clenched his fist in midair, causing the two streams of energy to vanish instantly. The paper man was reduced to ashes at the same time, yet our master's gaze didn't linger on the burning remains. Instead, he looked toward the river's surface, as the death energy had escaped and plunged into the depths the moment he struck. With a single thought, he spread his ghostly sense across the water, diving down to follow the trail where the energy had vanished. Following the path to the riverbed, he eventually found a sight that would chill anyone's blood, countless paper men standing in the silt. At that exact moment, every single paper had snapped around in unison, staring up at him with those same eerie, mocking smiles. With another clench of his hand, the paper figures were instantly twisted and crushed, turning into scraps that settled into the mud. After clearing them away, he withdrew his sense and turned his attention toward an ancient, sunken ancestral hall in the distance. Ishu, still perched lazily on his shoulder, asked what could possibly be down there worth a midnight swim. Nie Chaoshi shook his head, admitting he wasn't sure, other than the fact that the bottom was crawling with paper men. He noted the sunken hull and the heavy death energy, though something about the mixture felt distinctly off to him. He asked if Ishu had ever seen ghost energy and death energy blend like that, but the little creature just gave him a look of pure disdain. Realizing he was asking a spirit about spiritual anomalies, he decided it was best to head back until they knew what they were facing. Meanwhile, at the city lord's mansion in Bayou, Su Ziyuan was clutching a communication jade, his hands trembling slightly. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead as the voice of Sect Master Guoshorin roared from the other side, calling him a useless fool. The Sect Master screamed that the Immortal's great day was approaching, yet the paper talismans had been destroyed, questioning if Su Ziyuan wanted to die. Su Ziyuan pleaded for mercy, desperately explaining that he had no idea how the talismans in the secret room had turned to ash in an instant. Guoshorin, however, had no interest in excuses. He only cared about finding a solution to their sudden problem. Thinking quickly, Su Ziyuan suggested using the refugees outside the city as sacrifices to appease the river general instead. Guoshorin's voice grew even colder as he reminded him that refugees have little meat on their bones, giving him only 3 days to find a solution. He demanded new paper talismans, warning that if the Immortal's plans were delayed, Su Ziyuan would face the dire consequences of being purged. Su Ziyuan promised to handle it immediately, and after a brief silence, Guoshorin's voice returned to ask about the situation with Jiang Xian. Patting his chest in a show of confidence, Su Ziyuan assured him that everything was under control and proceeding exactly according to the plan. He explained that Jiang Xian's fate was already wavering and her life energy was clear, making her the perfect vessel at any moment. After hearing the report, Guoshorin told him to keep a close watch and allow no mistakes, promising a reward once the task was complete. The sect master's tone carried a hint of satisfaction as he mentioned the Immortal's favor before abruptly cutting off the communication. Su Ziyuan immediately summoned his subordinates to ask where Jian Huaishuang was, but the men simply looked at each other in confusion. They reported that no one had seen the master swordsman since the incident at the city gate, assuming the lord had sent him elsewhere. Veins popped on Su Ziyuan's forehead as he called them useless fools, ordering them to find him immediately, but to keep the search a secret. He warned them not to alert the enemy. While elsewhere, we returned to the territory where our protagonist arrived in high spirits. Nie Chaoshi and several small black snakes had already arrived and were coiled up obediently at the perimeter, which he chose to ignore for now. He summoned the ghost fires to carry the massive amount of materials brought back by the snake demons into the ghost prison for dismantling. Returning instantly to the bone altar, he began to take stock of the materials that were rapidly piling up like a small mountain. A flash of excitement crossed his eyes. After so much time spent accumulating resources, this latest haul was finally the tipping point. The materials required for the sacrifice were finally sufficient, and he decided, without a moment's hesitation, that it was time for a massive upgrade. As he initiated the sacrifice, a surge of vast energy instantly enveloped the bone altar, causing it to erupt in a brilliant, pure white light. The very texture of the altar seemed to solidify, radiating an aura that grew increasingly profound and ancient with every passing second. His status panel updated to show his new rank as Ghost Sovereign, with his domain's influence now expanding across several thousand meters. The Ghost Register capacity increased to 100, his elite retainers to 10, and the bone materials available for summoning were replenished. Having reached rank 2, he studied the panel before him and realized that the next upgrade would require a sacrifice of exactly 1 million units of ordinary materials, a staggering amount nearly equal to the entire population of a small city. He clicked his tongue in private. Rank 2 materials were no common goods, usually only harvested from cultivators or demons of that level. However, he wasn't truly worried, as he noticed the Flesh Forge and the Soul Kiln appearing in his building list. These processing facilities could compress and refine vast quantities of low-level materials into high-grade resources. So, the real issue now was population, as building and operating these factories would require a massive amount of labor. With that in mind, he turned his gaze toward the horizon, thinking that if a great evil god was to save all of humanity, he might as well start with Bayou City. Just then, the system granted a reward, further strengthening his evil god physique. The sacrifice function was enhanced, and a small additional panel labeled Enshrinement appeared at the bottom of the interface. This new feature allowed for the sacrifice of complete, high-level materials to unlock even greater potential. He tossed the 2 snake corpses onto the altar, and by sacrificing a century-old black snake demon, he unlocked a special building. This was the blood-seeking pool, which came with the special skill Silent Blood Surge to draw essence from the void. It would automatically generate 1 portion of random 3rd or 4th rank blood daily, a prospect that made his eyes light up. To be honest, it was a solid gain, as the blood-seeking pool functioned as a stable production site for high-grade blood. If it managed to produce 4th rank blood, it would be a massive profit, so he promptly moved the pool out of the ghost realm. He placed it at the very center of his territory and tossed in the massive blood pool he had looted from Foxlight Ridge. His plan was to use the abundant energy within the pool to nourish Yusu, who transformed while submerged in the crimson depths. She took the form of a miniature white jade sculpture as the blood in the pool rapidly surged to one side. On the other side, spring water rich with spiritual energy bubbled up, creating a sharp divide between the red and the clear. It formed a harmonious yet eerie image of a Taiji Yin-Yang fish, and once he confirmed all was well, he moved to the side. We see that he has constructed the Immortal Stone. Just at that moment, Hongling and Shirtu returned safely, making the already lively territory even more bustling than before. The villagers stared at the sudden appearance of the blood pool and the massive stone with expressions of pure wonder. They bowed toward the altar, praising the greatness of their god. After that, he had Hongling organize the villagers to test their spiritual roots one by one. He stood nearby, watching the data from the Immortal Stone flicker across his personal interface. We learned that most villagers had poor spiritual roots, making cultivation a struggle, though they were versatile workers. But then, something unexpected happened. Nearly half of them had already broken through to the first stage of cultivation. It seemed the aura from the general's platform was finally paying off. When it was Li Daju's turn, he rubbed his rough, calloused hands together and nervously pressed them against the stone. A faint light shimmered across the surface, revealing twisted patterns as the system panel displayed. Li Daju's information. His aptitude was a mortal-grade wood root, with a special constitution known as the woodcutter. This granted him a 20% boost in logging efficiency. His innate heritage, Wu Gang Reborn, meant that while working, he had a tiny chance to find random items. To be honest, it felt a bit like cheating, even if the odds were quite low. Still, it was a pleasant surprise. He granted Li Daju several pills as a reward, and the man, clutching his prize, ran excitedly over to Jian Hanshuang, an outsider he had just met. "Look, brother," he exclaimed. "This is the great god I was telling you about." Jian Hanshuang nodded, though he instinctively shrank back a little further. Meanwhile, Shirtu had stepped up to the Immortal Stone. His aptitude was an Earth-grade spirit root, paired with a special constitution. The 100 refined body, which boosted his spell comprehension and cultivation speed by 50%. Not bad at all. His innate heritage was the Tiangang Saber technique, which vastly strengthened his physical foundation far beyond his peers. It allowed him to convert his entire blood essence into a blade's edge, tripling his damage. Finally, we come to Hongling. Her aptitude was an Earth-grade fire root, with a constitution called the Exquisite Star Shell that tripled her pill-refining power. It also doubled her spell damage and granted her the Warm Fire Talisman heritage. A formidable set of skills, indeed. Her personality charm and physical attributes were boosted by a full 100%. After finishing this, he called Nia Chaoshi over. Chaoshi possessed an Earth-grade water spirit root and a special constitution known as the Pure Water Body, capable of purifying nearby water sources. This allowed the water to carry a faint spiritual energy, which, if consumed long-term, could strengthen the body. As for his innate heritage, it was natural auspiciousness, a power that could transform a simple dwelling into a sanctuary of peace and good fortune. Spiritual beasts rely on absorbing the world's energy to cultivate, and when he saw the final bit of information, his eyes lit up. He hadn't expected Nia Chaoshi to be a natural omen of luck. He then turned his gaze toward the white snake floating quietly nearby. From this day forward, he commanded the snake to be the guardian of the waters here, tasked with nourishing the local source. Nie Chaoshi looked up with his pale, shimmering eyes and accepted the command, gracefully moving his long, serpentine body. He arrived at the well and carefully coiled himself around the stone rim, pressing his scales against the cool, damp surface. Watching the white snake take the defense of an ordinary well so seriously, he couldn't help but smile. The creature was quite obedient. Meanwhile, in the city lord's mansion of Baiyu, Su Zhuan listened with a heavy expression as his subordinate delivered a report. They had tracked Jian Hanshuang's final known location, and it seemed he had headed straight toward the dead man's forest. A few days prior, 2 mysterious cultivators had indeed appeared at Huang Ridge to slay a snake demon. According to rumors from Wang Er and the others, these 2 cultivators supposedly hailed from that very same dead man's forest. Upon hearing this, Su Zhuan slammed his hand onto the table, ordering his most capable men to infiltrate the forest immediately. The primary mission was to find Jian Hanshuang and bring him back at any cost. Anyone who dared to interfere was to be executed. At the same time, Su Zhuan's trusted confidant, Wang Wei, personally took charge of this secret mission. He handpicked over a dozen elite guards at the 7th stage of Qi refinement, and the group set off toward the forest with murderous intent. The moment they stepped into the territory of the dead man's forest, a chilling, eerie aura washed over them, making Wang Wei's heart tighten. His hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword. He was certain that some powerful, malevolent force was lurking in this place. As he led the team deeper into the woods, we see a group of villagers gathered together, laughing and chatting quite freely. A flash of disgust and caution crossed Wang Wei's eyes. He was certain these people were merely puppets, bewitched by some evil force. It was then that his gaze caught a figure in the corner. It was Jian Hanshuang. Having found his target, Wang Wei felt a bit more at ease. He gave a subtle nod to his subordinate, Tang Tao, who understood immediately and strode over to stand before the young man. He told Hanshuang that with the celebration day approaching, it would be best for him to return to Baiyu City with them immediately. Hanshuang, already feeling like he had overstayed his welcome, gave a silent nod of agreement, but just as he prepared to leave, Widow Li stepped forward and grabbed his sleeve, insisting that his injuries hadn't healed and his face was still far too pale. She told him he couldn't leave yet and should rest for 2 more days. Then, she turned her sharp gaze toward Wang Wei and his men. She asked if they were blind, demanding to know why they were taking him when his wounds weren't fully healed. Wang Wei took a step forward. His spiritual energy flared, forcing Widow Li to stumble back as he called them foolish commoners who had been deluded by evil. He barked that they dared to obstruct official business and ordered them to kneel, his fingers snapping together like a drawn bow. A condensed bolt of white energy shot through the air, fast as lightning, aimed directly at Widow Li's knees. Hanshuang's pupils constricted, and, acting on pure instinct, he swung his giant sword to shield the woman. The energy slammed violently against the spine of the massive blade. Seeing him actually dare to interfere, Wang Wei's fury only intensified. He called Hanshuang a waste for daring to strike an official, claiming the young man had truly lost his mind to these demons. He reminded him that the sect's foundation was to slay demons, yet, as the head disciple, he was protecting these possessed puppets. He declared Hanshuang an absolute disgrace to the sect. Gritting his teeth, Hanshuang poured his remaining spiritual energy into the greatsword. The blade flickered with a faint light as he held his ground in front of Widow Li, followed by another deafening explosion of power. The giant sword was violently knocked aside, and the sharp energy slammed into Hanshuang's chest, throwing his body heavily to the ground. Widow Li was also injured by the residual blast, and it is here, at this critical moment, that everything hangs in the balance. A furious roar, like a sudden crack of thunder, echoed through the air as someone shouted for them to stop, and a figure instantly cut into the center of the battlefield. Wang Wei didn't even have time to see the newcomer's movements before an irresistible force slammed violently into his chest. In the next second, he was sent flying backward, coughing up blood, only stopping after he smashed through a thick, gnarled tree. Wang Wei struggled to lift his head, only to see a young man clad in forest-white bone armor slowly pulling back his fist. Wang Wei's expression turned grim as he realized he was facing a third-stage expert. It seemed this decaying old village held a dangerous secret. He wondered how such a young man could have reached the 3rd stage, but his face remained as cold as stone, offering no words at all. His silhouette blurred as he charged toward the subordinates, and in the span of a few breaths, over a dozen elites were on the ground wailing in pain. Having completely stripped them of their ability to fight, he then picked up the heavily injured and limp Wang Wei. He tossed him into a pile with the other elites who had their limbs broken, just as a middle-aged man carrying a hoe stepped forward and called out to Shirtu. The man asked how they should handle these people, and just as Shirtu was about to speak, my voice echoed directly within his mind. I told him to break them all and leave none alive. Shirtu gave a slight nod and drew the bone dagger from his waist. Step by step, he approached the paralyzed Wang Wei, who felt the tangible killing intent and began to scream in terror, begging for mercy. He cried out that they couldn't kill him because he was from the city lord's mansion, but before he could finish, his head hit the ground. The remaining guards had no strength left to resist, and their throats were quickly slit, followed shortly by a fit of violent coughing from nearby. Everyone turned toward the sound to see Jian Hanshuang lying on the ground, his entire body trembling uncontrollably. To their horror, a bloody, gaping hole had appeared on his forehead, a sight so gruesome it shocked everyone to their very core. And yet, Hanshuang himself seemed completely unaware of it as he struggled to push himself up and face the worried villagers. He offered them a deeply respectful bow before beginning to limp his way out of the dead man's woods, a sight that broke Widow Li's heart. She wanted to step forward and stop him, but Hong Ling gently held her back, telling her to let him go. She explained that this was the will of the gods, and that he had a mission of his own that he simply had to complete. She quickly turned around to pack some dried meat and healing herbs, then jogged after him to catch up. Without giving him a chance to refuse, she pressed the supplies firmly into Jian Hanshuang's hands. His body trembled slightly as he whispered his thanks. Meanwhile, I instructed Ishu to take Shitu's blood-patterned wooden tablet. We decided to follow him, though Ishu tilted his head, wondering what the point was in watching such a miserable sight. I glanced at the corpses of Wang Wei and his men, a slight, knowing smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Bai Yuqing had sent such a generous gift to our dead man's village, and it would be quite rude of us not to return the favor. It was time to see what Bai Yuqing and the Jin sect were really up to, a prospect that made Ishu's eyes light up with excitement. Causing trouble was, after all, exactly the kind of thing Ishu enjoyed most in this world. Ishu's form shifted as black lights swirled around him, transforming him into a human figure clad in a tight-fitting black night suit. Wearing a strange half-mask, we followed from a distance as Jianhan's Huang continued his agonizingly slow pace. He remained completely unaware of us, but as we approached Bai Yuqing's territory, I noticed something unsettling. The number of refugees gathered outside the city had plummeted since Shitu and Hongling's last visit. Right at the city gates, Jianhan's Huang was suddenly intercepted by 3 Jian sect disciples, one of whom stepped forward aggressively. He gave Jianhan's Huang a violent shove, catching him off guard and sending him stumbling backward. Seeing how pathetic he looked, the disciple's contempt deepened, and he spat the word useless right into Han Shuang's face. He barked that with the great ceremony approaching, the entire sect was exhausted while Han Huang had simply vanished. Because of his negligence, they had been punished by their master and forced to kneel in the ancestral hall all night. Growing angrier, the disciple kicked Han Shuang's shin, forcing a muffled groan from him as his body swayed violently. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead, yet he kept his lips sealed, prompting a cold sneer from the lead disciple. He mocked him for still clutching that broken sword, asking if someone as fallen as him even deserved to carry a blade. As he spoke, he reached out to snatch the giant sword, mocking Han Huang for using forbidden arts to save a few ant-like mortals. And the result? His cultivation was completely wasted, leaving him in this pathetic, ghostly state. He called Han Huang the biggest joke in the Jian sect's history. Meanwhile, hidden in the shadows, the protagonist nudged Ishu. He told Ishu to help him, but the spirit pointed at himself, wondering what possible benefit there was in helping such a man. In this great desolation world, strength is everything, and Ishu found it utterly foolish that Han Huang had thrown his power away. He saw no reason for sympathy, but the protagonist simply offered a small, knowing smile. While he wouldn't make the same sacrifice, he respected a true martyr. Kindness has a price, and this was Han Huang's choice. He noted that Han Huang must bear the consequences himself, then paused to produce a small medicine bottle, handing it over. He instructed Ishu to give him the pills and tell him that a martyr should never regret the path they once chose. Ishu stared at him for a long moment in confusion before finally muttering that his master was truly a strange soul. With those words, Ishu's form blurred, and he appeared at the city gates like a haunting phantom. He barked at the noisy crowd, calling them a bunch of trash, and before the 3 disciples could even blink, they felt an irresistible force strike them, their faces stinging from the blows as they tumbled backward onto the ground. The 3 were terrified, unable to even track the movements of this black-clad figure whose aura felt unfathomably deep. It was a power far exceeding that of their own master, and in an instant, their arrogance vanished into pure terror. They bowed hurriedly, trembling as they asked which great senior had come to interfere in the Jian sect's private affairs. Ishu crossed his arms with an arrogant air, claiming he was only there for their nonsense ceremony and simply disliked their faces. Then, Ishu stopped them and casually tossed a crude porcelain bottle to Jianhan's Huang, his tone remaining deliberately harsh. He announced it was a reward from his master, adding that since the path was chosen by Han Huang himself, he shouldn't regret it. Having delivered the message, his figure vanished instantly, while the protagonist turned his attention away from the city gates. Instead, we see him turning his gaze toward another spot outside Bayou City, where a group from the city lord's manor has arrived. Accompanied by several guards, they appear among the refugees, where a few dying souls, barely clinging to life on straw mats, suddenly stir. They crawl up with every ounce of strength they have left, their eyes flickering with a desperate, newfound hope. The surrounding crowd surges forward like a tide, surrounding the officials while shouting that the masters have finally arrived. They wonder aloud if today is finally their turn, and their buzzing conversations soon reach our protagonist's ears. A tall, thin man tugs on his companion's sleeve, insisting that the city lord is a living saint for distributing porridge these past few days. He believes that being recruited to expand the new city is a path to becoming a legal citizen, a stroke of incredible luck, really. The man beside him is equally excited, while among the officials from the manor, the scene is far more businesslike. A middle-aged man in charge barks orders at his subordinates to maintain order, making it clear they don't want the old, weak, or sick. He demands only the young and strong, and the guards respond by roughly shoving the crowd aside to begin the selection. Soon, about 100 relatively fit young men are pulled out, their faces a mix of confusion and the joy of a second chance. The official scans the group with a look of cold satisfaction before waving his hand and ordering his men to take them away. Meanwhile, as the protagonist and Ishu remain hidden, he recalls a report Hongling had given him not long ago. She had mentioned that the masses gathered outside Bayou City were all people whose homes had been destroyed by demons. They were willing to risk their lives for him, and he had planned to have Hongling and Shitu handle the recruitment very soon. He hadn't expected the city lord's manor to beat him to it, so he quietly whispers to Ishu to follow them. Following the group, we arrive at a riverbank where a medium-sized cargo ship is already moored and waiting. The guards impatiently urge the refugees forward, shouting at them to get on the boat and stop wasting time. Looking at the vessel and the murky river water, some of the refugees feel a sudden, sharp prickle of unease. But under the harsh reprimands of the guards, they have little choice but to step onto the gangplank one by one. At that moment, the middle-aged man produces a thick stack of blank papers, requiring every refugee boarding the ship to leave a thumbprint. Ishu takes a quick sniff and covers his nose in disgust, sensing the faint but unmistakable scent of death. It is indeed the aura of the CSW, clinging to those very papers, and the protagonist nods as he hears this. He hadn't expected the CSW in the river to be connected to Bayou City, a revelation that raises some troubling questions. He wonders if this is the city lord's personal doing or an order from the Jin sect. To be honest, his impression of the sect hadn't been that bad. After all, they protected the citizens and produced upright figures like Jian Huaishuang, which makes this discovery all the more jarring. Once the refugees have all boarded, the cargo ship slowly leaves the shore and heads toward the west bank, causing the protagonist's brow to furrow. There are clearly many secrets hidden here, and he decides it is time to follow them and meet this CSW face to face. Ishu grumbles, asking if he can handle the CSW business himself without dragging a great lord rat along, but the protagonist just tells him to relax. He assures him that since his recent breakthrough, he is terrifyingly strong, far stronger than whatever is lurking in the water. As the cargo ship drifts downstream along the murky river, the middle-aged man and his core members remain standing on the bank. They whisper among themselves about how to celebrate their success, while Ishu, hidden in the shadows, feels a flicker of intent. A wisp of colorless, odorless plague energy slips into their lungs, and a middle-aged man suddenly feels a sharp itch in his throat. He lets out a cough, only to watch in horror as large, bulging blisters rapidly erupt across the back of his hand. His skin turns black and begins to rot before his very eyes, and just as he tries to call for help, his voice fails him. He and the other managers collapse to the ground simultaneously, their breath leaving them in an instant. Ishu's figure quietly reappears beside the protagonist, clapping his hands and declaring that these pieces of trash weren't even worth the exercise. The protagonist, however, keeps his eyes fixed on the departing ship, not even turning his head to acknowledge the display. He simply gives a distracted thumbs up, offering a dry compliment to the rat's impressive skills as they focus on the task ahead. As the ship moves deeper into the water, the mist on the river grows thick, carrying with it the faint, lingering scent of sorrow. And here we encounter a disturbing, bone-chilling cold, a mixture of ghostly energy and the heavy scent of death. It is indeed that same mysterious entity from before, and even the thugs on the ship begin to feel the eerie atmosphere. They stir restlessly, wondering why the mist has grown so thick and sensing that something is very wrong. The guards are clearly on edge as well, shouting for silence before roughly swinging the cabin doors open. Using scabbards and whips, they drive the thugs onto the deck, where the men huddle together in fear. Next, the guards produce heavy ropes and begin binding them tightly, one by one, as the panic starts to rise. One man cries out, asking why they are being tied if they are headed to the new city, but the lead guard only sneers. He kicks open a hatch to reveal piles of heavy stones hidden below, a sight that leaves the thugs utterly paralyzed with shock. The guards begin hauling out the boulders, firmly tethering them to the waists and feet of every single prisoner. The guard tells them they are going to build the city from the bottom up. They can jump or be kicked. To be honest, it's a grim choice. Meanwhile, standing by the river, the protagonist instructs Ishu to save them, and the rat's spirit quickly slips toward the lead guard. Without a moment's hesitation, he snaps the man's neck, leaving the remaining guards pale with terror at the sudden attack. They wonder if a great general has appeared, but Ishu doesn't bother with words as his dark green plague energy erupts. In an instant, the remaining men are dissolved by the rot, and we see the ropes binding the thugs begin to wither. Under the influence of Ishu's energy, the restraints snap quietly, yet the thugs themselves remain completely unharmed. They stare at the spot where the guards vanished and at the terrifying, dark figure that has suddenly appeared before them. The brief spark of joy at being saved is immediately replaced by an even deeper, more paralyzing fear. Ishu lets out an impatient roar for them to shut up, and instantly, all sound on the deck vanishes. He nods, satisfied. He tells them they will now do exactly as he says, asking which of them actually knows how to pilot a ship. After eyeing the few men who tremblingly raise their hands, he tosses them a map of the docks. They have work to do. He orders them to sail the ship back to a specific location, where two children in bone armor and a white snake will meet them. The men look at the wooden plaque, clearly wanting to ask more, but Ishu warns them not to question his orders and just obey. With that, his figure flickers and vanishes into the deck. Meanwhile, we return to the protagonist as he dives back to the riverbed. He heads straight for the sunken ancestral hall, and as he draws closer, the structure begins to emerge from the depths. The outline of the building grows clear in the dim water, a strange structure meticulously crafted from various types of colored paper. A plaque hangs over the main entrance of the hall, with the words Zhenjiang Shrine written in thick, dark ink. He attempts to envelop this paper shrine within his ghostly realm, but finds that he cannot contain it from the outside. So he expands his divine sense to feel the energy. It is at the ghost shadow rank, though the aura feels incredibly peculiar. Its power is a chaotic mix, and we realize that the ghostly energy blanketing the river originates from this very paper shrine. With this in mind, he walks directly through the open paper gates, and suddenly, the environment around him shifts violently. The freezing river water and the thick silt vanish instantly, and strangely enough, a sun appears in the sky above him. The sensation beneath his feet changes as well, replaced by the feel of solid, sturdy bluestone pavement. The surrounding buildings transform from flimsy paper into real wood and stone, bustling with people coming and going. It is a scene of a thriving temple filled with the scent of incense, where a kind-looking old man in ancient robes approaches him. The old man bows deeply and asks if our traveler has come to offer incense and pray for blessings. He studies the elder carefully. Instead of answering, he unleashes his ghostly realm once more, using invisible chains to firmly pin the old man to the spot. The kind smile on the old man's face doesn't flicker for a second. He simply repeats his question like a broken record. Deep down, he realizes this is merely a puppet, likely very similar to his own white-bone ghosts. To be honest, it's a clever disguise. These are all just shells controlled by an evil spirit. He expands his power to its limit, letting his energy surge through the hall. In an instant, he dispels the death energy sustaining the puppet, and the old man's form slowly begins to dissolve into nothingness. At that exact moment, every pilgrim inside and outside the shrine suddenly froze mid-motion. Then, as one, they turned their heads toward him and repeated the chilling request, "Pilgrim, please offer incense." With those words, they began to move with stiff, mechanical steps, slowly swarming toward him from every direction. Seeing this, he quickly retracted his ghostly realm, letting his own death energy erupt violently around him. The moment those approaching figures touched the shockwave of his energy, they simply crumbled away. They reverted into thousands of colored paper scraps, and the illusion of the bustling temple began to peel away. The paper shrine on the riverbed was revealed once more, with a blurry divine statue enshrined at its very center. Under the relentless pressure of his death energy, the statue finally shed its disguise to show its true form. It was a suit of armor meticulously folded from heavy paper, bound tightly by several thick, black iron chains. Yellow talismans were plastered all over the chains, a sight that confirmed his earlier suspicions. This was far beyond the capabilities of the city lord's mansion. This was clearly the work of the Bayou Sword sect. They were feeding this evil spirit with the flesh and souls of mortals, then using talismans to keep it imprisoned. One has to wonder what the sword sect hopes to gain from such a creature. He then summoned a white-bone ghost. The skeleton reached out to grab the chains, causing its death energy to clash violently with the spiritual light of the talismans. A sharp sizzling sound filled the water, and with one powerful tug from the skeleton, the chain snapped with a loud crack. The talismans instantly lost their luster, and the paper armor, now free from its restraints, began to tremble violently. It released an even more frenzied burst of ghostly energy, seemingly desperate to fight back against its new intruder. But he simply exerted a more powerful force, pinning the entire paper shrine and the armor down with overwhelming weight. Meanwhile, back at the city lord's mansion, Su Ziyuan paces restlessly in his study as the days pass by. The new deputy, Wang Wei, and his elite squad were sent to the Dead Man's Forest, yet there has been no word from them. To make matters worse, the stewards and guards sent yesterday to handle the livestock have also failed to return. What on earth is going on? Su Ziyuan is now plagued by a growing sense of unease, as if things are spiraling out of his control. And right at that moment, the communication jade in his robes begins to glow. The message is clear. Su Ziyuan, tomorrow is the celebration, and the sect disciples are descending. This is the day of the Holy Spirit. Not a single mistake will be tolerated. If anything goes wrong, you alone will be held responsible. Su Ziyuan spends the entire night tossing and turning, unable to sleep. The next morning, before dawn, the city's main roads are already packed. Crowds of citizens are kneeling in dense rows, all of them wearing the most decent clothes they own for the occasion. Their faces are a strange mix of pious awe and a lingering, hidden dread. Not long after, nearly 100 women in matching white sword robes appear in the sky, led by none other than Jian Huaishuang herself. The sight triggers a sudden, frantic burst of cheering from the citizens. Meanwhile, just off the main road, we find our protagonist and Ishu sitting by a window in a private room on the second floor of a tavern. As he watches the formation of sect disciples passing through the air, he frowns. It isn't just the few he saw before. Something is wrong. Every single one of the disciples has an unnaturally pale complexion, and the ghostly energy clinging to them is incredibly heavy. It is the same dense, foul energy he found in that paper shrine at the bottom of the river. He pauses for a moment, his voice carrying a hint of cold mockery. The living are acting as companions to ghosts, and the shrine is a companion to the dead. It turns out this so-called Bayou Sword sect is the true source of the ghostly tide. Ishu watches the disciples with genuine interest. He wonders aloud if they all have a giant hole in their heads under those bamboo hats, just like that boy Jian Huaishuang. He doesn't answer immediately, choosing instead to focus on the ground where Su Ziyuan is leading a group of officials forward. The city lord bows deeply to the sect elders leading the procession, his face covered in a sycophantic, flattering smile. Seeing this, Ishu rubs his hands together in excitement, suggesting they just take them all out at once while they're in one place. The old man claims he hasn't had a good workout in far too long, but he simply shakes his head. He turns his gaze toward the massive altar in the city center, noting calmly that there is no rush. The true master of this show hasn't appeared yet. At this moment, after the Bayou sect disciples land, they begin a procession around the city to distribute what they call blessings. They scatter, immortal dew said to ward off evil, before gathering in front of the great altar to perform a solemn sacrificial rite. Throughout the entire process, every single disciple moves with mechanical precision, their faces remaining entirely devoid of emotion. The citizens, however, are too immersed in their fanatical faith to notice anything is wrong. And then, as high noon approaches, the ceremony enters its most critical phase. We see the central square of the city now teeming with a massive, restless crowd. Every eye is focused on the front of the altar, where Jian Huaishuang stands alone before the thousands gathered. Taking a deep breath, he begins to recite the final prayer, his voice amplified by spiritual power, so it echoes across the entire square. The chant carries a strange, haunting rhythm. Just then, Ishu twitches his nose, sensing a sudden mist rising as our protagonist gives a quiet nod. He continues to watch silently. As Jian Huaishuang reaches the end of the prayer, his voice suddenly rises to a sharp, piercing pitch. With a fervor that borders on madness, he commands them to kneel and welcome the immortal. At those words, every citizen in the square, along with the ranks of the Bayou sect disciples behind him, drops to the ground in unison. And in that very moment, they all remove their hats and headscarves. The scene that follows is exactly what Ishu had suspected all along. As the 100 disciples reveal their heads, we see that every single one of them shares the same horrific trait as Jian Huaishuang. Their brains have been completely hollowed out. Even among the kneeling citizens, a significant number bear similar, varying marks of corruption. Yet, not a single face shows any sign of distress. They all act as if they see nothing wrong. Jian Huaishuang looks to the sky and continues his chant. As he speaks of the white jade in the heavens, a grotesque tentacle suddenly erupts from the bloody hole in his forehead, reaching for the sky. Almost instantly, the brilliant light of the midday sun turns dim and gloomy, casting a sickly shadow over the entire city. The tentacle twists and coils in the air, swelling into a massive, red demonic entity that extends countless smaller appendages downward. These tentacles pierce precisely into each kneeling worshipper. Yet, there is no resistance or terror. Instead, they all tilt their heads back in unison. Using every ounce of their strength, the crowd erupts into a deafening, fanatical roar, chanting for the immortal to grant them eternal life. In the next heartbeat, those thousands of tentacles begin to rapidly drain the flesh and blood energy from the people below. The energy flows upward into that massive, pulsing orb of flesh. At that exact moment, our protagonist sets down his teacup and decides it is time to join the fray. He and Ishu vanish instantly from the 9th-floor balcony. Down in the square, Ishu begins to move like a blur, circling the area at incredible speed. A dense, rhythmic sound of tearing fills the air as the thousands of tentacles connecting the sky orb to the believers are targeted. In the blink of an eye, every single one is severed at the root. High on the terrace, Sect Master Guoshorin leaps to his feet, demanding to know who has interfered. Behind him, the elders turn pale as they witness the scene. The citizens, suddenly disconnected from their blessing, look around in a daze at first. But then, they turn their eyes toward Ishu with pure, unadulterated rage, as if he had just stolen their only chance at salvation. Ishu simply shakes his hand, his voice dripping with impatience as he mutters about how these people truly don't know what's good for them. Guoshorin doesn't hesitate, immediately ordering his followers to form a formation and execute the intruders on the spot. The disciples below respond with mechanical precision, their blades clearing their sheaths to form a deadly, coordinated sword array. In an instant, their killing intent locks onto our protagonist and Ishu. He remains expressionless, merely raising a hand with calm indifference. Suddenly, dozens of pale, skeletal ghosts and a terrifying, massive venomous serpent materialize out of thin air. Guoshorin's pupils shrink in shock as he recognizes the third-tier entities, realizing he is facing the infamous necromancer himself. Our protagonist gives him no time to think. With a single thought, he issues the command to kill them all. The skeletons and the serpent lunge toward the disciples. Against such overwhelming power, the struggle is, to be honest, entirely one-sided. The disciples, who were already little more than hollow puppets, fall in an instant. Guoshorin watches the slaughter with eyes full of desperate fury. He screams for them to stop, his hands weaving a complex seal as his spiritual energy begins to burn in a self-destructive frenzy. He offers his own body as a sacrifice, pleading for the immortal to descend and slay the evil before him. Our protagonist merely offers a cold snort. Suddenly, a ghostly decree unfurls, its eerie power instantly blanketing the entire square as the mist begins to dissipate. And then, everything changes. The once fanatical citizens are instantly gripped by terror as Ishu delivers a harsh, biting threat, telling them all to shut up. He warns that if they make another sound, he'll kill them all. His voice isn't loud, but it carries a terrifying, murderous intent. The square falls silent in an instant, leaving behind only the sound of suppressed gasps and the rhythmic trembling of the frightened crowd. Meanwhile, standing before the altar, Jian Huaishuang's body suddenly jolts as the surrounding mist begins to dissipate. The hollow numbness in his eyes recedes like a tide, replaced by a flickering clarity and a deep, searing sense of pain. He stares at the carnage before him, unsure of exactly what happened, his mind filled only with fragmented, broken memories. Yet the scene before him is a merciless reminder of the true nature of the sword sect and the so-called immortal Baiyu. The agony of his collapsing faith leaves him utterly lost, a sight that makes Ishu glance at him with a hint of surprise. Ishu remarks that it's impressive he could regain consciousness at all after being drained for so long. Jian Huaishuang looks up, calling him senior. He asks what on earth has happened, but Ishu simply gestures with his chin toward the surroundings, telling him to see for himself. At that moment, several elders seize the opportunity to swoop down, landing beside Jian Huaishuang to restrain his limbs. They shout to protect the vessel at all costs, pleading for the immortal to descend immediately before everything is lost. After absorbing Guoshorin's spiritual energy, the great demon in the sky drops another tentacle, its massive form suddenly contracting. Following the path of the tentacle, it forces its way into Jian Huaishuang's body, drawing out a scream of pure agony from the young man. His body convulses violently for a moment before all struggling stops, and Jian Huaishuang slowly opens his eyes once more. Those eyes, once filled with resilience and confusion, are now entirely indifferent as his gaze finally settles upon our protagonist. The entity acknowledges him as the infamous necromancer, introducing himself simply as Baiyu. Our protagonist stands tall, hands behind his back. He identifies himself as the Bone God Sovereign, while a strange, incredibly eerie smile spreads across Baiyu's borrowed face. Baiyu admits our protagonist is powerful, noting that his third-tier strength combined with that troublesome death energy rivals a fourth-tier being. He even confesses that even a fifth-tier existence might struggle against him, and that in his current state, he is no match. Our protagonist offers a faint, knowing smile, noting that Baiyu seems to have some self-awareness. He asks if the entity plans to surrender, but Baiyu's grin remains unchanged. Suddenly, Baiyu strikes out, her palm slamming into the heads of the very elders who were protecting her. In an instant, they are dead, a cold betrayal if we ever saw one. Ishu observes that this isn't the original evil spirit, telling the entity not to bother denying it. After all, while such spirits are powerful, they lack a mind of their own. He explains that spirits are merely anomalies following rigid rules, whereas this being possesses clear consciousness, specific goals, and even emotions. Baiyu suggests there is no need for such defensiveness, claiming they are of the same kind. Ishu, however, simply scoffs at the idea with visible disdain. He retorts that he is nothing like this monstrous creature. Baiyu doesn't seem bothered by the insult. Instead, she calmly raises her hand. Countless tiny tentacles erupt from her skin once more, snaring the bodies of the sword sect disciples scattered across the square. She absorbs them all into her form, her aura swelling with power. She then insists they aren't enemies, but potential allies. She proposes a partnership, noting that since Ishu has succeeded and she is close to her own goal, they should work together. At this moment, we can sense that Baiyu carries more than just a single aura. She is a vortex of heavy resentment and murderous karma. She has imprisoned every soul she consumed within her own body, transforming herself into a literal, living ghost. Seeing that our protagonist remains unmoved, Baiyu persists, reminding him that the Golden Buddha is about to manifest in this world. She argues that the righteous path of immortals and Buddhas will never tolerate their existence, but together, they could be unstoppable. She claims the Thousand Island Army would be theirs for the taking. Ishu raises an eyebrow, admitting that he is well aware of the situation. He remarks that she seems to know quite a bit. Baiyu's smile deepens, as if she's finally found someone who truly understands the world. She declares that only the status and power of an anomaly are supreme, praising him for successfully seizing such a vessel to build his foundation. She explains that she, too, has found a way to steal divinity and condense faith, making them natural allies in this chaotic era. With a sudden wave of her hand, she releases talismans radiating a chilling, ghostly energy that begin to dance and swirl around her. She invites him to watch, suggesting that on such an important day of celebration, an ally should be there to witness the transformation. Baiyu then takes the white paper collected from the refugees and slams it violently into her own forehead, a truly unsettling sight to behold. The paper vanishes into the jagged, bloody hole in her forehead, and the talismans around her suddenly take flight. They strike specific positions around the square with surgical precision, embedding themselves deep into the ground. Hidden patterns beneath the bluestone slabs ignite instantly, and a massive summoning circle erupts across the square's surface. It traps countless terrified citizens within its glow, while the very core of the formation centers directly on Baiyu herself. With a look of manic certainty, she laughs, declaring that this trap of human and livestock will serve her purpose. She calls for her Junjiang shrine to manifest, offering thousands of souls to complete her transformation into a ghost immortal. But as her voice fades, the paper shrine she expected to descend never appears. There is only a deathly, suffocating silence. Baiyu's wild laughter freezes, twisting into a mask of shock and disbelief. Her shrine is nowhere to be found. She wonders how the shrine she nurtured with ghostly energy for years could fail to appear, but then she senses something. The connection to her shrine isn't severed, but it feels smothered by something else, something that feels like pure death. She demands to know what he did. Ishu simply smiles, noting that he never actually agreed to be her ally. Upon hearing this, Baiyu's mind reels with shock, causing the volatile power within her to recoil and lash out. She lets out a piercing, agonizing scream, clutching her forehead as her body begins to twitch and convulse violently. Ishu lets out an unabashed chuckle, giving Su Ziyuan a light kick and telling the old man to take a look. He mocks the immortal they worshipped, asking if she doesn't look absolutely pathetic right now. Su Ziyuan is too terrified to argue. The old man can't even bring himself to look at the distorted Baiyu. To him, this entire day feels like a waking nightmare. He wonders how a grand celebration turned into a carnival for evil spirits, and how their immortal could be such a monster. He thinks of the years he spent working diligently, even doing things that weighed heavily on his conscience for her sake. He questions what his loyalty to the sword sect was even for. Meanwhile, Baiyu continues to struggle against the internal collapse. She spits out a mouthful of blood and nearly collapses, gasping why. Ishu calmly replies that their paths were never the same. But when Baiyu lifts her head again, the silence in her eyes has vanished, replaced by a look of absolute, desperate finality. At this, not only does Ishu raise an eyebrow, but even we see a flicker of genuine surprise cross the narrator's own eyes. Under such intense erosion and backlash, it seems this woman's consciousness has somehow managed to regain control of her body. Jian Huaishuang first struggles to steady herself, then turns toward Ishu and offers a solemn, respectful bow of gratitude. Then she turns to us, her knees hitting the bluestone slabs with a heavy thud as she thanks the Lord for the gift of medicine. As we are about to speak, we notice the dark patterns across the square are still glowing with a faint, lingering light. The formation continues to drain energy, no longer seeking the river's depths, but greedily pulling from everything nearby. It begins to harvest the flesh and life of the citizens, as countless fine, spectral threads spread out from the array's center. These threads wrap around the people, whose faces turn ash-gray before our eyes as the light fades from their gaze. They howl in pain, but lack the strength to break free. With a slight frown, a hand is waved to sever a cluster of threads. The threads crumble instantly, yet even more surge forth from the patterns of the array to take their place. One can feel that this formation shares the same source as the Junjiang shrine, decayed and parasitic. A soft sigh escapes. It's a bit troublesome, really. Ishu curls his lip, asking if this prickly array can even be broken through. Hearing this, Ishu bristles with indignation, asking if he's truly being treated like a common rodent for manual labor. He notes that casting a spell would require a price, and since the array doesn't harm them, why bother? At most, the people below will just be drained dry. A look of feigned regret follows. It truly doesn't seem worth the effort. Jian Huaishuang listens in silence, watching as the formation beneath her feet continues to ruthlessly consume the citizens' lives. She feels Baiyu stirring within her, still fighting to regain dominance. In that fleeting moment, she realizes the only way out. She bows once more, explaining that this array was once a guardian of the city, but has now become a source of evil. She knows that as long as a trace of herself and the inner Bayou remains, the nightmare will only continue to grow. As long as this formation stands, it can never be truly broken, and the sword sect will only drift further down this dark path. We see Jian Huaishuang's gaze sweep across the devastated square, taking in the absolute chaos around her. The sword sect remains in her heart. She owes them for her upbringing, even if she intends to repay that debt in another life. Since the sect has committed such a grave error, she feels she cannot escape blame, and so she reaches for the giant sword on the ground. She holds the blade to her own throat, offering her life to help the Lord break the array. But then, the unexpected happens. The flash of a blade passes by, yet there is no spray of blood. Instead, a powerful force strikes her wrist with precision. The giant sword is knocked flying away. A soft sigh is heard, followed by a reminder of a previous warning. It seems she didn't quite listen when she was told not to make decisions she would later regret. To be honest, she was being a bit hasty. She does not fear death, believing it to be the only way out, but a small smile meets her bewildered gaze. She is strong for suppressing the corruption with a mortal's will, but she's told not to be so impulsive. No one said there wasn't another way. If she truly wants to atone, she must stay alive. Dying solves nothing and changes even less, which, naturally, is a very fair point. With a simple wave of a hand, thousands of medicinal pills suddenly come whistling out from a sleeve in a grand display. These pills land accurately at every node across the square, exploding instantly into a torrent of pure, cleansing energy. Immediately after, the 4 major nodes shatter, and the spectral threads that were draining the citizens snap and vanish into thin air. The gray pallor on the people's faces fades quickly, and their vacant eyes begin to focus again, though they remain weak and terrified. Their lives are no longer in danger, a reversal that happened in a mere heartbeat. We then see the narrator approach the stunned Jian Huaishuang. With a flick of the fingers, 3 soul-restoring pills are sent into her mouth, dissolving into a cool, satisfying sensation. The energy rushes straight to Jian Huaishuang's consciousness, and that agonizing, tearing pain finally begins to subside. Her trembling soul is suddenly stabilized by a gentle, yet incredibly resilient power that wraps around her spirit. Looking ashamed, Huaishuang finds herself unable to speak, though weakened by the backlash. Her foundation still struggles to hold firm. When asked if she can hold on for a month, Jian Huaishuang nods solemnly, earning a small, reassuring smile in return. She is told to remember that next time, if a task is beyond a mortal's reach, she might try asking a god for help. With a flick of the wrist, the Zhenjiang porcelain paper cut is revealed, and the formation immediately senses Tong Yuan's original aura. The array begins to churn violently once more, and soon, a phantom image of the porcelain structure slowly condenses above the square. Guided by the formation, the paper cut merges into Jian Huaishuang's mind, prompting her to immediately pull back her own will. She begins to guide the residual power of the white jade within her body to make contact with the external vibrations. Under the guidance of her soul, now stabilized by the 3 pills, the 2 energies are forcibly softened and fused together. As the last light of the formation fades and the paper cut turns to ash, Jian Huaishuang suddenly snaps her eyes open. Now clad in spiritual armor with a jade-colored glint in her eyes, she has successfully integrated the great Zhenjiang array. Immediately after, the soul and flesh energy previously absorbed by the white jade are suddenly expelled from her body. They transform into expressionless paper figures, drifting softly through the air before landing quietly on the ground. Having lost all its energy sources and targets, the great array lets out a low, mournful hum and finally falls completely silent. We see the Lord observe Jian Huaishuang, whose aura has completely changed, and the eerie paper figures scattered across the floor. Things seem stable for now, so she is told she will stay by the Lord's side for the next month to adapt to this new body. As for whether she wants to purge her sect, that is her choice, a statement that makes the pale faces of the paper figures twitch. Jian Huaishuang nods heavily, and shortly after, the Lord and the mouse vanish from the scene in a flash of movement. Not long after, a slight commotion breaks out at the city gate as the figures of Shitu and Hongling finally appear. Following behind them is their means of transport, Nie Chaoxi, whom Wang Er recognizes instantly alongside Shitu and Hongling. Nearly moved to tears, Wang Er rushes forward to kowtow, crying out in relief that the immortals have truly arrived. He offers his deepest thanks for saving their lives, and afterwards, under Hongling's careful explanation, the situation becomes clear. We see the people of Bayou City expressing their unanimous desire to follow the Lord to a new sanctuary. The relocation efforts proceed with steady precision, as the massive goose snake and Nie Chaoxi carry the people in shifts. They head toward the direction of the dead man's spirit, where Hongling's efficiency proves to be remarkably high. After successfully gathering all the ordinary citizens who were willing to leave their homes behind, she and Shitu quickly seize the remaining leadership of the city lord's mansion and bring them before the Lord for judgment. The Lord's gaze sweeps over them, noting the bloody scent of sin clinging to their souls, and summons the ghost fire. Those with the deepest karma and most cruel natures are dismantled on the spot, reduced to the same cruelty they once stored. As for the survivors, the Lord delivers a harsh and thorough reprimand to ensure they understand their new reality. The matter is then handed over to Shitu, who solemnly accepts the task. Not long after, these former elites and strange officials are unceremoniously tossed into the deepest depths of the wailing mine. Their lives as beasts of burden begin, and with that settled, the Lord starts organizing the labor for the new arrivals. The testing stone is brought out once more to evaluate the 30,000 people, including Bayou citizens and surrounding refugees. Among the crowded masses stands Jiang Tsugu, nervously rubbing her calloused hands together, hands that have worked the earth for a lifetime. She had spent her entire life dealing with fields and never imagined she would one day leave her ancestral home. Bayou City had turned into a nightmare overnight, and this unknown god's territory seemed just as eerie and filled with energy. Deep down, Jiang Tegu is gripped by an immense fear as she tremblingly places her hand upon the cold testing stone. A faint but vibrant green light flickers across the stone's surface, revealing her aptitude, a yellow grade with spirit root. She possesses a special constitution known as the 5 grains wind root, which increases the yield of any farmland she manages by 40%. Her lineage carries a trace of an ancient remnant god, granting her a natural talent for anything related to weaving. She holds an extraordinary affinity for nurturing growth, ensuring that everything within her jurisdiction flourishes with supernatural vitality. Under her care, all crops grow twice as fast and produce double the usual yield. There is even a slight chance for plants to undergo a spiritual mutation. Suddenly, a majestic voice echoes across the field. Calling for Jiang Tegu, the voice causes her to drop to her knees in terror, having no idea what she has done wrong. We see that the Lord had little reaction to those before her, yet he singles her out specifically. From this day forward, she is to manage the spirit fields and coordinate with the black snakes for irrigation and tilling. Jiang Tegu is stunned by the command, shaking her head frantically while insisting she isn't capable of such a task. She tells herself she is just an ordinary farmer, unworthy of managing such divine land. She looks toward the distance, watching the small black snakes obediently turning the soil, and feels her legs go weak. To her, they are terrifying monsters. A ripple of hushed whispers spread through the crowd, their eyes filled with a fair amount of confusion. These spirit fields are clearly precious treasures of an immortal. Why would the Lord entrust such a heavy responsibility to a simple peasant woman? However, a few neighbors who know Jiang Tegu well begin to speak up. They admit that her crops were always the best, consistently producing much more grain than anyone else's. At that moment, Hongling walks over and gently helps her up, speaking softly to the trembling woman. She explains that managing these fields doesn't require martial prowess, but rather the deep experience she has with the earth. The black snakes are merely the Lord's servants who will follow her orders. There is no need for her to feel inferior. She must trust that the Lord's vision is never wrong. Jiang Tegu slowly and tremblingly raises her head. Hongling then places several medicinal pills into her hand. Once swallowed, they feel like a spring rain hitting parched soil. A warm current instantly dispels her coldness and fatigue as her rough, weathered skin becomes smooth and radiant. Her gray hair turns a deep, rich black before their very eyes, and a white glow manifests above her head. The onlookers are left utterly speechless. Such is the power of a god, to literally turn back the clock on a human life. It is nothing short of a divine miracle. Hongling pats Jiang Tegu on the shoulder, noting that with such responsibility comes the need for matching power. This is the Lord's recognition and blessing, a natural talent that many others could only dream of obtaining. Jiang Tegu instinctively straightens her back, feeling a surge of courage and responsibility she has never known before swelling in her chest. She bows deeply, thanking the Lord for his grace and vowing to do her absolute best to manage the spirit fields for him. She promises never to betray his trust. Around her, the other villagers watch with eyes full of envy. This is a monumental opportunity, after all. Who wouldn't want to be chosen by a god? And we see that this is not an isolated case among the 30,000 new followers. Quite a few of them possess unique traits. For instance, some have the golden stone talent, which is quite rare. This increases the yield of rare ores by 1% during mining. Others possess the Shinong's touch ability. This boosts healing effects by 1%, while others possess the divine maintenance skill. When repairing or building, their speed increases by 1%, and the durability of the structure is boosted by 50%. There is even a chance they might discover special blueprints. Under the Lord's will, the veterans begin guiding these newcomers. The entire territory begins to operate with high efficiency. Those with special traits are personally given pills by the Lord to maximize their cultivation. Even those with the poorest talent are boosted to the second rank. As for the original 100 village women, the Lord selects those who have worked the hardest, such as Li Guan and the man known as Blackface. Dozens of others, including the leaders from Sherdeng village, receive their own rewards and promotions. This immediately ignites a fire in the hearts of the new followers. It seems that specialized skills aren't the only way to be noticed. Loyalty and hard work can also earn one a divine blessing, as long as they are willing to put in the effort. They believe that one day they too will receive divine pills and become cultivators. Meanwhile, Hongling follows the Lord's arrangements, quickly organizing and grouping the tens of thousands of people. The mountain of low-level materials in the warehouse finally finds a purpose. At the Lord's designated locations, the flesh forge and the soul altar begin to take shape. Ground is broken as construction begins on 2 massive structures, each capable of housing 1,000 workers at a time. Their daily operation requires a staggering amount of first and even second tier wood to be used as fuel. Through this process, ordinary flesh and souls can be compressed and purified into higher tiers, a grim but necessary efficiency. We see the existing spirit fields are suddenly stretched thin, so the Lord immediately constructs 4 Infeng spirit fields at the territory's edge. More labor is poured into these projects, and the mining operations expand as well. All the buildings combined now require a massive workforce. The total reaches exactly 10,000 people. As for the remaining followers, the Lord watches the howling mine operating day and night. Seeing the piles of mine materials stacking up in the warehouse, a single thought becomes clear in his mind. It is time to build a city. He immediately pulls up the town planning techniques from his construction list to begin the grand design. Using the bone altar and the blood pool as the central origin points, he begins to sketch the blueprint for a true urban center. The core area, centered around the bone altar, blood pool, and general's platform, is designated as an absolute restricted zone. This will be the heart of their faith, with other areas radiating outward to include production zones and various functional buildings. After mapping out the residential housing and basic infrastructure, he hands down the blueprints and the initial construction tasks. His gaze sweeps over the core managers he has gathered, looking for the right person to lead this monumental task. Finally, his eyes land on a man named Ruching, who possesses extraordinary craftsmanship. The Lord maneuvers a skeleton to stand beside him. Ruching bows low as the Lord speaks, entrusting him to lead and coordinate the entire city's planning and construction. He is told that any manpower or materials he needs can be requested through Hongling. Ruching looks up, stunned by the weight of the role. To be honest, the burden feels far too heavy for him. He opens his mouth to decline, but then he meets the Lord's calm, steady gaze. Feeling the expectant eyes of the villagers around him, a surge of artisan pride begins to swell within his chest. He takes a deep breath, pushing down his fear, and vows to give his absolute best to the project until his very last breath. Hongling then steps forward with a practical question, asking what the city should be named. The Lord pauses for a moment of reflection. Pointing to the rising land beneath his feet, he declares that this city shall be named the City of the Dead. A few days later, on a rugged mountain path, two figures are walking in silence, with Jian Huaishuang dressed in paper robes. He still clutches that iconic sword, though his face is paler than ever, and a faint green light occasionally flickers in his eyes. Following behind him are dozens of expressionless paper figures, moving with an eerie, rhythmic precision. They retain the names of the sword sect disciples they once were, even carrying paper-made swords at their waists. This is the final legacy of the sword sect, and the heavy burden that Jian Huaishuang must now carry alone. The disciples had been deeply corrupted by Yu's ghostly energy, and only through this dark power could their order be reshaped. He had wiped out the entire sect, not out of a desire for revenge, but because they all needed atonement, just like him. As Jian Huaishuang passes through the Dead Man's Woods, the view before him suddenly opens up into a vast clearing. Though the surroundings remain eerie, the area is bustling with life and the sounds of a massive, ambitious construction project. Jian Huaishuang watches this scene in silence before ordering his paper disciples to take the sect's resources to Hongling. He then walks directly to the center of the territory, kneeling before the Lord to report that his mission is complete. The sword sect is no more, and all remaining resources have been brought back. The Lord then manifests from the ghost prison. Pointing toward the trial stone near the blood pool, the Lord tells him to rise and test his strength there. Jian Huaishuang stands and presses his palm, pulsing with a complex, dark energy against the cold surface of the stone. A panel filled with text pops up, and the Lord's gaze lingers on the words, "Perfect vessel for Jiang Xingyu." It all becomes clear now. It's no wonder Bai Yu chose him, given a fate and destiny like this. He is indeed the perfect vessel for an abomination like the Zhenjiang Shrine, though he unfortunately chose the wrong path. As for the ghost vessel trait, the Lord isn't worried. Once the offering cooldown resets, he can simply be sacrificed at the altar. With that settled, the Lord turns his attention back to Jian Huaishuang, whose aura has become remarkably restrained. Now that Bai Yu City has fallen, Bai Yu is dead, and the underground treasury has vanished into thin air. The remaining demons trapped in the channels are likely eyeing the defenseless villages that have lost their protection. The Lord commands Jian Huaishuang and Shirtu to lead a troop and bring the surviving nearby villages under their banner. Jian Huaishuang accepts the order immediately, finds Shirtu to relay the new instructions, and prepares for the journey. He then goes to settle his paper figure disciples, while Shirtu stands nearby, his face glowing with a bright, eager energy. It isn't just his kind heart that hates seeing humans slaughtered, it's the pride of carrying out the Lord's direct will. He imagines himself like a divine stone from a legend, sweeping away evil by the Lord's command. The thought fills him with an indescribable excitement, until Hongling, watching all of this, decides to intervene. She delivers a sharp smack to the back of his head, leaving Shirtu rubbing his skull and looking at her with wounded pride. Hongling crosses her arms, looking at him as if he's a complete fool, and asks what he truly thinks of Jian Huaishuang. Shirtu rubs his head, confused by the question, but gives a characteristically honest and straightforward answer. He claims Brother Huaishuang is a good man, strong, determined, and deeply loyal to those he cares about. He reminds her how Huaishuang guided him back at Sherdeng village and has now earned the Lord's personal favor. Hongling hits him again, calling him an idiot and asking if he feels even the slightest hint of a threat. Shirtu is genuinely baffled by the idea of a threat, so Hongling lowers her voice in sheer frustration. She tells him to use his brain for once and consider Jian Huaishuang's incredible character, talent, and raw power. Everything about him is top tier, and more importantly, the Lord has been paying him an unusual amount of attention. The Lord personally stabilized his condition, granted him power, and has now entrusted him with this vital expansion mission. Leaning in close, she whispers that surely he doesn't want to be replaced in the Lord's heart by this newcomer. The smile on Shida's face finally freezes. Hongling snorts, declaring that she will be joining this mission as well. Shirtu hesitates, wondering what will happen to the territory with so much to do, but Hongling simply waves him off. A sly, knowing smile plays on her lips as she notes that the construction and management of Wangxi City are finally on track. With all the rules and regulations firmly established, she feels she can safely leave for a short while without any issues. Besides, with the Lord himself personally overseeing the city now, what could possibly go wrong? Hearing this, Shirtu immediately goes to gather the men for departure, while we return to the Lord after he finished assigning the tasks. He arrives at the imperial court formed by the blood jade in the center of the blood pool and gives a grand wave of his hand. Suddenly, the pile of jade slips looted from the Bai Yu sword sect appears in the court, just as Ishu returns to his rat form. The little rat is busy devouring a roast duck, grumbling that the new pretty boy has only just arrived and is already being put to work. He points out that the newcomer still has a mess of things to settle, yet the Lord is already piling on more missions. The Lord picks up a dark gold jade slip to examine it, casually remarking that the man is indeed quite fair-skinned. However, since Jian Huaishuang is now an evil spirit, tireless and immune to pain, there is no reason to feel guilty about overworking him. Ishu rolls his eyes, calling the Lord an absolute monster for such a cold-blooded perspective on management. The Lord merely smiles, his gaze returning to the jade slips as he asks if Ishu has ever heard of the Golden Buddha. Still indignant over the monster comment, Ishu huffs, but he can't help answering the question out of pure habit. He asks if the Lord means the golden Buddha line mentioned by that old ghost by you, though he only knows of a Buddhist sect in Yogwang State. When the Lord mentions that Yogwang State is exactly where they are, Ishu is stunned, having assumed they were still in Tianchi State. The Lord shakes his head, clarifying that they are currently in the Dead Man's Forest of Tsiudao County, within the Qiandao district of Yogwang State. Ishu looks as if his entire worldview has been shattered, wondering how on earth the Lord managed such a feat. He can't fathom how he was brought from Tianchi to Yogwang in an instant, as even a 7th-rank expert shouldn't have such cross-state power. Ishu wants to press for more answers, but he stops when he sees the Lord suddenly frown and set down the ancient scroll in his hand. Our Lord turns his gaze toward the entrance of the living dead secret realm. For just a moment ago, something shifted. He senses that one of the skeletons left to gather materials in the realm has suddenly vanished, prompting him to check his system panel. The current count of ghost jars stands at 99, and his mind finally pulls away from his earlier thoughts about the Golden Buddha. Another notification on the system panel, one that had been set aside for a long time, immediately catches his eye. The mission is to explore the living dead secret realm, but as he rubs his temples, he notes the progress bar hasn't budged at all. Those ruins, shrouded in toxic miasma, are bottomless. Most ordinary zombies there only hover between the 1st and 2nd ranks. It should be impossible for a 3rd-rank skeleton to vanish completely without even having the chance to send out a warning. Thinking quickly, he issues an immediate command for all nearby skeletons to converge on the coordinates where the last one disappeared. At the same time, he projects his consciousness into the realm, linking his senses with the 5 skeletons closest to the site. We see a dilapidated park covered in green toxic fog, though strangely enough, the zombies here are unusually scarce. In any normal situation, zombies wouldn't just disappear for no reason, so he carefully maneuvers the skeletons to investigate. He soon finds traces of a struggle. Thick black blood unique to zombies is splattered on the ground, and several claw marks are visible. There is also a clear trail of blood where something was dragged toward the depths of the park, and the skeletons begin to follow it. The skeletons move past a flower bed that holds nothing but dirt and withered roots, only to find a bizarre creature crouching on the ground. Beside it lie the mangled remains of several zombies, and the Lord's expression suddenly becomes quite strange. This is none other than the stone-bone beast, a creature that struck terror into hearts during his previous life. These beasts primarily hunt humans, but when fresh prey is scarce, they aren't above feeding on the bones of the undead. Many poorly defended human settlements were wiped out by these beasts traveling in packs, but why would one appear here? This realm was merely a reward from the system's lucky draw, yet it contains a nightmare unique to his past life. With a single thought, he commands the 5 3rd-rank skeletons to strike at once, closing in on the creature in a flash. However, it should have been impossible to instantly kill another skeleton of the same rank without even allowing it to send a warning. More skeletons soon arrive at the scene, and under our Lord's command, they begin using the park as their central point of operations. They launch a carpet-style search and clearing operation, and after quite a bit of busy work, the area begins to yield results. They manage to slay 5 or 6 more stone-bone beasts lurking in the shadows, but beyond those creatures, nothing else is found. He finds no sign of any more powerful presence, which leaves him completely puzzled as to what is actually happening here. He wonders what on earth could have deleted his skeleton so quickly, so he orders all ghost race members in the realm to be doubly vigilant. He tells them to pay special attention to any movement in the park, and just as he prepares to withdraw his consciousness from the realm, the corner of his eye catches the mission panel, showing that the progress for exploring the living dead secret realm is finally at 1%. He can't help but wonder if the progress moved because he cleared out these stone-bone beasts that don't actually belong in this realm. Perhaps the true exploration has only just begun, or maybe killing them was the key to unlocking the next stage. It's possible he has touched upon a deeper secret of this realm. Regardless, that 1% is a significant step forward. It has finally pried open a corner of the door to this treasure trove, just as Ishu finishes devouring her roast duck. She lies on the edge of the jade pavilion, licking her paws with lingering satisfaction before looking up at her master. She happens to glimpse the several carcasses lying before him, tilting her head as her tiny red eyes fill with curiosity. She asks what these ugly things are, and when he identifies them as stone-bone beasts, Ishu simply shakes her head in confusion. She claims that in all her years of travel, she has never seen such strange things that are neither demon, monster, nor ghost. Hearing this, his heart stirs. If even a 300-year-old creature like Ishu has never seen a stone-bone beast, it confirms his suspicions. It seems highly likely that these beasts are not actually native creatures of this particular world. Over the next few days, he keeps a close watch on the skeleton's movements within the secret realm while multitasking elsewhere. He spends his time reading the secret scrolls brought back from White Jade City, discovering that a hidden clue remains in the dead man's tomb. We see him find an old man to question, who reveals that about 500 years ago, a humanoid crab-ear spirit occupied this land. Its supernatural powers were strange and caused no small amount of trouble until the original ruler of Tsiudao County, Lord Xiaofeng, fought a battle to the death with the creature, resulting in the Lord's fall while the crab-ear spirit vanished without a trace. It was only later that Baiyu arrived here, seizing the territory that once belonged to the Lord and establishing White Jade City. The old man finishes his story before realizing something is wrong. The crab-ear spirit of the dead man's tomb. Isn't that his current master? A cold sweat immediately breaks out on his brow, his face wrinkling like a dried flower as he struggles to find a way to explain himself. Our protagonist listens quietly, knowing that the humanoid spirit the old man speaks of is certainly not him, as it could manifest a human form. That creature relied mostly on illusions created by its ghost domain, while its true body remained a mass of accumulated white bones. It seems the dead man's tomb holds quite a few secrets, a thought he ponders as he begins to expand his influence. He finds it remarkable that a small place like Tsudao County could produce 3 crabbier spirits. Perhaps the land is uniquely blessed. Or perhaps this starting village is simply full of hidden bosses, a thought that leaves him momentarily amused before he moves on. He checks the system panel, where the latest notification shows he has successfully recruited a new group of human followers. This earns him a yellow-grade lottery ticket, bringing his total count of loyal followers to 254. He has received many similar notifications lately, suggesting that Jian Huaishuang and Shirtu are having great success incorporating the surrounding villages. Following this, he decides to use the 5 yellow-grade lottery tickets he has accumulated all at once. Most of the rewards are rare first or second-tier materials for construction, but one 5th-tier treasure stands out, the blood Bodhi vine. This particular vine requires regular watering with blood to grow and flourish properly. The higher the quality of blood provided, the better the Bodhi fruit it produces, a detail that makes his eyes light up with interest. If this could change a person's cultivation potential, it would be of extraordinary significance for his followers with mediocre talent. Since it can provide a continuous harvest, he immediately decides to plant the blood Bodhi vine within the Hutu spirit field. With the spiritual field and Zhang Zihu's special constitution working together, he expects the vine to flourish. Meanwhile, in the distant Lijia village, Jian Huaishuang watches expressionlessly as blood drips onto the ground, quietly wiping the crimson stains from his heavy sword. A massive demon corpse lies sprawled on the earth, while the villagers huddle together behind their broken fences. Their faces don't show the joy of survivors, but rather a mixture of terror and disbelief. The monster is dead, yes, but the one who killed it doesn't exactly look human either, and hushed whispers begin to spread among the crowd. The fear hasn't vanished with the demon's death. Instead, it has shifted its focus onto Jian Huaishuang himself. At that moment, Hong Ling steps forward to break the heavy silence, addressing the elders and folk by explaining they aren't from White Jade City. She gestures toward Jian Huaishuang, introducing him as Lord Jian, a wandering envoy serving under the bone god of the city of the dead. She claims the god pities the suffering of the people and has commanded them to sweep away the demons and protect the sparks of humanity. Jian Huaishuang's expression twitches slightly. To be honest, he feels a bit embarrassed by the grand title Hong Ling just made up. Hong Ling, however, doesn't bat an eye, pausing briefly as her gaze sweeps over the villagers' weary and fearful faces. She acknowledges their doubts, but asks if White Jade City ever bothered to deal with the spider demon that devoured so many of them. She asks them directly if they haven't had enough of living every day and night in constant, precarious fear. These words strike a chord in everyone's hearts, and many bow their heads, their expressions filled with a bitter sadness. Hong Ling's voice suddenly rises, proclaiming that their lord possesses boundless power and has built a new city on the edge of the dead man's tomb. In that city, there are vast spiritual fields where everyone can finally eat their fill and live in peace. She explains that all under the Lord's command slay demons just like this envoy, pointing again to Jian Huaishuang's intimidating form. She claims his current appearance is a divine body granted specifically to protect humanity. Otherwise, she argues, how could he so easily slay a fierce demon that left them all helpless? The villagers look at the massive corpse on the ground, then back at the imposing and steady Jian Huaishuang, as the fear in their hearts is slowly replaced by a glimmer of hope. Shortly after, the oldest elder in the village steps forward, bowing deeply toward Jian Huaishuang and Hong Ling in a gesture of profound respect. He thanks the divine envoys for saving their lives, declaring that Lijia village is willing to travel to the new city and seek the bone god's protection. Just as the villagers, moved by Hong Ling's words, begin to pack their meager belongings to follow them to the city of the dead, a cold, sharp voice suddenly rings out from outside the village, telling them to wait. Everyone turns their heads toward the sound. We see 7 or 8 figures in black robes approaching rapidly. Hong Ling watches them, wondering aloud who these newcomers could be. Jian Huaishuang's eyes narrow slightly as he identifies them as the Blackwater Guard, a powerful demon-slaying organization directly under Landau City. They are responsible for monitoring demons and handling major supernatural threats. Leading them is a cold, handsome man named Xingyu, who serves as the captain of this particular Blackwater Guard squad. At this moment, Xingyu addresses the villagers. He warns them not to listen to lies or be deceived by demonic appearances, questioning how such monstrous forms could ever be considered good. As he speaks, one of the black-robed men pulls a compass-like artifact from his robes, its needle spinning frantically in his hand. The device emits a faint spiritual glow. After a careful inspection, the man's face pales as he leans in to whisper urgently to Xingyu. He reports that the captain's detection of death energy matches the aura found in the ruins of White Jade City. Confirming that these are indeed the target demons and their followers, Xingyu's heart sinks, and he immediately orders his squad into formation. At the same time, he shouts to the panicked villagers, announcing that they are the Blackwater Guard of Landau City. He reveals that White Jade City was destroyed days ago, City Lord Su Ziyuan is missing, and the White Jade sect has sealed its mountains. With no survivors left in the inner city ruins, the news has shocked the entire prefecture, especially since Lord Su was appointed by the governor himself. Now that the Lord has fallen to evil spirits, they have been ordered to investigate and capture the culprits. These words change everything. An immediate uproar breaks out among the villagers, as their newly blossomed hope is crushed by a wave of massive, overwhelming fear. They look back and forth between the righteous-looking Blackwater Guard and the undeniably non-human Jian Huaishuang, completely at a loss. Standing nearby, Shirtu lets out a furious roar, calling their words nonsense and accusing the official Su Ziyuan of conspiring with the old White Jade Ghost. Shirtu shouts that the city lord tried to trap the entire city, and it was only the Bone God who saved countless lives. Before he can even finish his sentence, Xingyu strikes, sending a condensed blade of blue water energy straight at Shida's face. Jian Huaishuang steps in front of Shitu, raising his armored arm to block the blade with brute force. Yes, just like that. At this moment, a cold fury begins to boil within him, as he realizes these black water guards are hypocrites of the highest order. Where were these so-called protectors when countless villages were being slaughtered by demons? Nowhere to be found, it seems. Where were they when White Jade City was being prepared for a blood sacrifice? They only care now because Su Ziyuan is gone. Because the city lord was appointed by the governor, they suddenly appear to investigate. Jian Huaishuang can handle being doubted. He can even endure their strange looks, but he will not tolerate them slandering the one who saved so many lives. To call his new god an evil spirit is too much. Nearby, Hong Ling and Shitu see the guards attacking and lose their tempers as well. They immediately draw their weapons and join the fray, with fire and spiritual energy clashing violently in the air. The ancient sword's energy whistles as the two sides collide. Fortunately, both parties show a small amount of restraint. They carefully direct the shockwaves of their battle away from the defenseless villagers. However, Jian Huaishuang is struggling. His mind is being relentlessly whispered to by the white jade bone. It tells him to look at these so-called righteous men. It asks when they ever truly cared for the lives of commoners, noting that they only value their own power and order. The voice asks if he is angry, urging him to release the power within to tear through their hypocrisy. A tempting offer, truly. Just as Xingyu unleashes another powerful wave-cutting strike, Jian Huaishuang's movements suddenly stiffen. The clarity in his eyes is replaced by a strange, eerie jade-colored glow. Something has definitely gone wrong. A low, distorted laugh begins to spill from Jian Huaishuang's throat, sounding nothing like his usual self. Countless tentacles suddenly erupt from the gaps in his armor, lunging toward the surrounding black water guards. Jian Huaishuang chuckles as he looks at Xingyu, mockingly thanking the captain for his help in breaking his restraint. The entity within noted that it would have taken much more effort to emerge on its own, just as its tentacles pierced the skulls of the black water guards. They began frantically draining their brains and essence, leaving Shitu to watch in horror as he cried out for his brother, Jian Huaishuang. He tried to rush forward, swinging his 5 swords at the tentacles while shouting for Jian Huaishuang to wake up and regain his senses. He pleaded with him not to be controlled, but the white jade bone merely snorted, dismissing him as an ant before lashing out with the tentacle. The strike aimed straight for Shitu's head. He swung his blade with everything he had, yet he was still sent flying backward by the force. On the other side, Hong Ling was faring no better, as a tentacle ignored her wall of flames and pierced right through her shoulder. In her desperation, Hong Ling managed to speak clearly and calmly, telling Jian Huaishuang once more not to let the creature control him. She asked him how the bone god would feel knowing his first disciple had fallen so low as to become a mere puppet for a demon. These words struck deep into the core of Jian Huaishuang's consciousness, causing the expression on the white jade bone's face to shift suddenly. The entity could clearly feel Jian Huaishuang's will beginning to boil with intensity, all because of that single, pointed question. The muscles on his face began to twist, and his body trembled violently, causing the rampaging tentacles to falter in their movements. The white jade bone let out a roar of absolute agony as the eerie jade light in his eyes flickered with unstable energy. Deep within his mind, Jian Huaishuang fought a fierce battle against the entity, which mocked him for being a fool and a mere tool. It claimed he was nothing but a useful blade to his master, and that once he lost his utility, his fate would be worse than death. As soon as those words were spoken, his left eye snapped back to clarity as he told the voice to shut up and stop insulting his lord. Yet the right side of his face broke into a wild laugh, asking why he would ever bow to another when he now possessed a divine body. The entity insisted it was saving him, urging him to stop resisting and surrender his flesh so it could fully restore its ancient power. It promised him a high station in the new world, but Jian Huaishuang's expression hardened as he declared he would never be swayed. He vowed that in this life, he would serve only one master, even as his hand rose involuntarily to strike at the remaining guards. He then forced his own arm back down, his entire body shaking as he struggled to maintain control over his own limbs. As Jian Huaishuang struggled, the tentacles surrounding him began to lash out wildly, allowing the remaining black water guards a brief, desperate chance to escape. One of the younger guards whispered to their leader, Xing Lu, asking what on earth was happening, but Xing Lu could only shake his head in silence. He noted that those seduced by such entities often end in madness, but Jian Huaishuang let out a cold sneer, telling him to shut his mouth as well. With a casual flick of a tentacle, he struck Xing Lu into unconsciousness, leaving the few surviving guards trembling in absolute terror. They huddled together for support, not daring to make another sound, while on the other side, a roar of extreme agony echoed through the air. The jade light in Jian Huaishuang's eye slowly began to fade as he commanded the white jade entity to get back where it belonged. A moment later, we see the wild tentacles begin to twist and retract into his body, leaving Jian Huaishuang stumbling and falling to one knee. He looked up at Shitu and Hong Ling as they rushed toward him, forcing himself to stand while his gaze swept over the defeated guards on the ground. Turning back to his companions, he ordered them to take these people back so that the Lord could decide their ultimate fate. Hong Ling looked at Jian Huaishuang's exhausted state and sighed before she and Shitu began to move with practiced coordination. They quickly confiscated all the magical artifacts from the fallen guards and used the seized ropes to bind each prisoner securely. The villagers of Lijiao watched this display in stunned silence. Any lingering hesitation they had about leaving completely vanishing in that moment. Left with nothing but obedience, they followed Jian Huaishuang and the others as they made their way toward the city of the dead. Some time later, Jian Huaishuang led the captives to the White Bone altar, kneeling before his master to report that his mission was complete. He recounted the day's events with concise clarity, reporting every detail truthfully, without a single hint of concealment or excuse. The master sat calmly upon the white bone altar and, with a flick of his finger, sent a dark medicinal pill flying toward Jian Huaishuang. He explained it was a third-tier soul-stabilizing pill, meant to help him steady his spirit and suppress any intrusive, chaotic thoughts. The master then instructed him to have Hong Ling and Shirtu settle the villagers while they continued their unfinished tasks. Jian Huaishuang caught the pill with both hands, and as he felt the pure soul power radiating from it, his heart tightened with a mix of emotions. Sensing the deeper intent behind the master's arrangements, he couldn't help but look up, his voice filled with a quiet, questioning respect. Jian Huaishuang asked if he was being relieved of his duties because his loss of control had disappointed his master, while the master simply offered a faint smile. The master asked why he should be disappointed, noting that although Jian Huaishuang had struggled, he ultimately used his own will to suppress the white jade entity. He had prevented a greater disaster from befalling the Blackwater Guard, and, more importantly, had not betrayed the trust of the villagers. The master told him he had done quite well, and hearing that he hadn't caused disappointment, Jian Huaishuang finally felt the tension in his heart begin to ease. And yet, a small flicker of disappointment was unavoidable as he respectfully lowered his hands, murmuring that he understood. The master explained that the fusion between the fragment and the white jade soul was still unstable, and the conflict within his spirit remained unresolved. Until that was fixed, it wasn't wise for him to handle outside missions alone, so he was ordered to stay by the master's side for now. Jian Huaishuang bowed his head in obedience, though the master had already calculated this move carefully. Keeping him close was a deliberate choice. Firstly, it allowed for direct supervision to prevent another violent outburst, and secondly, it provided a chance to observe the changes in his body. By watching how he integrated the fragment's traits, the master hoped to glimpse the deeper mysteries of the fragment's true origin. Of course, we shouldn't assume this meant he was getting a vacation. Resting was simply not on the agenda. With a body that didn't tire and a cultivation level that needed stabilizing, the master saw no reason to let him sit idle. He needed to be worked to the limit, or, as the master preferred to call it, undergo high-intensity adaptive training and ideological education. This would ensure he had no free time to dwell on self-blame or get lost in the dark shadows of his past. The master gave himself a silent pat on the back for such kindness, then turned his attention to the magical artifacts confiscated from the guards. Most were utterly unremarkable, but a device called the Thousand Mechanism Cord caught his eye, appearing to be a low-tier ceiling artifact. As he picked it up, a crisp click echoed through the air, and the Thousand Mechanism Cord sprang open. Several faint glows escaped from within and hit the ground, revealing the prisoners who had been trapped inside. We see 3 trembling flower demons and a nightmare creature curled into a tight, fearful ball. Yishu let out an unceremonious sneer, mocking Xing Lu by asking if this was the great heroic achievement of the Blackwater Guard. Xing Li's face turned a pale shade of white as Yishu mocked him for only being capable of slaying small demons who couldn't even speak. Deep down, he knew that killing such weak creatures was hardly a feat to boast about, yet he still stiffened his neck to offer a defense. He argued that a demon is a demon. Even if they are small today, they might cause a catastrophe tomorrow, so one must act early. He claimed this was the duty of the Blackwater Guard, causing Yishu's eyes to narrow at such a convenient excuse for preventative action. Yishu pointed out that with so many great demons slaughtering villages nearby, the Blackwater Guard hadn't actually bothered to challenge any of them. Choked by the truth and unable to respond, Xing Lu took a deep breath, his face hardening with a look of absolute martyrdom. He told them to do as they pleased, declaring that since joining the guard, he had long ago put aside any fear of death at the hands of evil. He warned them not to expect any submission, as Landau City would surely seek justice for their sacrifice in the end. Behind him, the other guards raised their heads with the same resolve, but the master simply waved a hand to dismiss their dramatic display. He noted that such perfectly good labor shouldn't be wasted. Instead, they would be sent for reform to sit at the same table as City Lord Su's men. The master mused that the late City Lord Su would surely be comforted to have so many familiar faces joining him in the afterlife. Yishu gave a strange little laugh and pointed at the 4 small demons, asking what should be done with these seemingly useless creatures. The master looked at the flower demons and decided to send them to Lu Cheng, who was currently in charge of the city's reconstruction. Since Wangxi City was still a construction site, these demons would make excellent helpers for the landscaping work. Though the flower demons couldn't speak, they were spiritual enough to realize they weren't being killed, and their fear turned into immense gratitude. Yishu gave the little nightmare creature a nudge with his toe, jokingly asking if this piglet was one of the master's own kind. The master suggested sending it to the widower Li, who was managing the ranch. Perhaps it would be useful once it grew up. Yishu's fur bristled instantly as he snapped that a high-level dream demon was nothing like this unevolved nightmare trash. Later, Jian Huaishuang personally delivered the flower demons to Lu Cheng, while the Blackwater Guard was escorted deep into the Howling Mine. And this is where we hear the system chime. The master checked his panel to find the ghost count had decreased by 1 in this cursed realm. The master decided to spend another of his ghost records, immediately connecting to the command token within the secret realm. We see the location is still marked at that ruined park, which by now has been completely overrun by countless black insects. They were frantically devouring everything in sight, from the stagnant water on the ground to the rusted metal fences. Even the toughest mutated plants couldn't escape their fate, but then, the master released the power of the ghost record. The energy instantly saturated the entire park, causing the swarming insects to pause for a brief, eerie moment of stillness. Suddenly, a chorus of sickening cracks filled the air as the shiny black carapaces of every single insect began to change. Pale, skeletal patterns rapidly surfaced on their shells, as if their hard exteriors had become a breeding ground for growing bone. Sharp, twisted bone spurs burst through their shells without warning, and in the blink of an eye, the scene was transformed. The black insect hive that once covered the ground vanished entirely, and in its place, something far more macabre appeared. We are left looking at a white sea of skeletal urchins, where every single insect has been utterly transformed. They were skewered by the bones growing wildly from within their own bodies, frozen forever in their final living moments. This was the fairy tale infection of the evil spirit, using death as a brush to reshape the very form of life. The master felt a quiet sense of satisfaction at this bone spur hell he had created until he noticed a gap in the center of the park. The space around it was slightly distorted, so he chose a random skeleton to go over and investigate the anomaly. He watched through its eyes as it stepped into the shimmering light. After a brief moment of weightlessness, the skeleton's vision cleared. What we see now is a vast, endless expanse of dusty yellow, with scorching sand underfoot and a hot wind whipping up the dust. Not far off, a lonely village sat upon the plain, its wells dried up and its surroundings desolate. Most of the doors and windows were tightly shut, and there wasn't a single sign of livestock or family life to be found. Not even a stray insect could be seen. The only sign of life came from the people scattered throughout the settlement. Most of them were simply slumped on their doorsteps or leaning against withered trees, waiting for a dawn that seemed far away. Their eyes were hollow, staring blankly at the gray sky with chests rising and falling so weakly it was barely noticeable. The moment the skeleton stepped out of the shimmering light, this deathly silence was shattered like a chain of ice. Every eye in the village locked onto the skeleton's form, and in the next heartbeat, they began swarming toward it from all directions. Then, they all knelt at once, crying out that a messenger of the great god had finally descended upon Shirkin village. They begged to bring out the last offerings, pleading for the messenger's mercy to grant them the divine sea. The master felt something was wrong the moment he entered the light. Every command he sent to the skeleton felt sluggish. The feedback was incredibly delayed, and he could clearly sense a massive distance between the skeleton and his true body. His bone summoning skill was being rapidly weakened by the distance, and very soon, things took a turn for the worse. His ghost record stopped responding entirely, the skill failed, and he lost all control over the skeleton's movements. Under the gaze of countless fanatical eyes, the skeleton took 2 steps before collapsing into a heap of scattered dry bones. A brief silence followed, only to be replaced by an even crazier wave of shouting about the divine sea. Over a dozen people lunged forward like hungry wolves, fighting until they were bloodied just to grab a piece of the remains. They tore at each other and cursed, treating these simple dry bones as if they were the most precious treasures on earth. The master's consciousness was trapped in the skull lying on the ground, forced to watch this farce unfold until the very end. Finally, a particularly sturdy man named Zhao Ming kicked the others aside, scooped up the skull, and retreated with his family. They pushed through the crowd and ducked into a house where the light was dim, placing the master's remains on the floor. An old woman urged Zhao Ming to bury it quickly, just like the fatty bone the previous messenger had left behind. Zhao Ming nodded and grabbed a cracked ceramic basin before heading out to the parched, dried-up backyard. He used a stone shard to dig a small pit, solemnly placed the skull inside, and slowly covered it with the dry earth. He exhaled in relief and let his shoulders relax, turning to his family with a small, hopeful smile to tell them it was done. "It's buried," Zhao Ming said. "Now our family has a guardian spirit, and we can finally sleep in peace tonight." His wife's body trembled as her eyes filled with tears, and she grabbed his arm, asking if it was truly real. He held her hand tightly, assuring her that just like the rumors from Haishuyu, burial brings protection, he was certain of it. He explained how old Wang from Haishuyu found a walking skeleton, took pity on it, and dug a hole for it to rest. After he led the skeleton into the grave and buried it, not a single person died in Haishuyu for days. This news had spread like wildfire through Kushi County, and the old woman clasped her hands, praying to the heavens. As Zhao Ming's wife held their child, relieved they could finally sleep, we shift our gaze back to the master. Buried in the dirt, his vision went dark as the connection to the skull severed, and his consciousness returned to the dead spirit realm. The system promptly notified him that his ghost record count had decreased, leaving him feeling quite frustrated by the whole ordeal. He had lost a summon and was forced to experience a bizarre ritual, though, to be fair, it wasn't a total loss. The progress for his side quest to explore the living dead secret realm ticked upward, increasing by another 0.5%. He observed the spatial rift created by the insects, and after confirming it was stable for the time being, he decided to investigate in person, letting his consciousness slip through the rift to descend upon Shirkin village once more. It was now the middle of the night, with every door locked tight, so he released his divine sense to scout the area. Suddenly, he caught a trace of malevolent energy in front of a house, and looking closer, he saw something unsettling. A strange creature was actually knocking on the door, so he quietly released his death energy like a web across the ground. He intended to probe the creature's true nature, but the moment his energy was about to touch it, the thing reacted. Its aura fled instantly, vanishing into the thick blanket of the night before he could even get a good look. He couldn't even identify what the creature was. Meanwhile, inside the house, Zhao Ming slumped to the floor in terror. "It's gone. It's really gone," he whispered, as his brother Zhao Yong dropped his wooden club, both overwhelmed with relief. They desperately suppressed their voices to avoid waking the child, huddling close together in the shadows. With ears strained for any sound outside, they prepared to keep watch until dawn. The next morning, the villagers of Shirkin poked their heads out of their doors, confirming that the night had truly passed. By unspoken agreement, they gathered near the ancient well, where the village chief began his habitual head count. As the final person was counted, a wave of hushed, surprised murmurs rippled through the crowd. Not a single soul was missing. The chief asked the group whose door had been knocked on last night, and Zhao Yong instinctively raised his hand. However, to his surprise, and the surprise of every villager there, one by one, others followed suit. It turned out that 3 or 4 other families raised their hands as well. Some had only managed to grab a small finger bone. while others had found only a tiny fragment of a broken rib. The old chief looked at them in disbelief, asking if they were all visited. When asked what happened next, Zhao Yong stepped forward, explaining the knocking stopped after 7 or 8 times. He pointed behind his house, referring to the walking spirits that had descended yesterday, claiming their presence in the ground had protected them. He believed those spirits kept the life-taking monsters at bay. Hearing this, the chief's eyes lit up, thanking the heavens above. He declared that Shurkin village was saved, urging everyone to treat the burial sites as shrines with incense every morning and night. As the chief went to inspect each house that had been visited, the master remained hidden, calmly observing the scene. He knew the truth behind their theories, of course. The reason the creature fled last night was far more practical. It was likely the lingering death energy he left in the bones that did the trick. Once the creature sensed his aura, it retreated into the distance. It was an exceptionally cautious entity, but this was hardly a permanent solution. The death energy remaining in those fragments would inevitably dissipate over time. After all, they weren't true remains, but merely manifestations of his ghost record. Meanwhile, the villagers continued their excited chatter, and the conversation naturally shifted to the neighboring village of Wangsha, wondering how they had fared through the night. The villagers worried that Wangsha had few young men to keep watch, though they hoped the spirits descending there had kept them safe. The old village chief pondered for a moment before deciding they must send someone to check on their neighbors, as they were all in this together. He couldn't just watch them die. If necessary, they would bring them all to Shurkan, where the spirits were actually useful. Zhao Yong immediately volunteered to lead a small group, and once he received the chief's blessing, he prepared to depart. As Zhao Yong and young Zhao Ming set off, we see the master following slowly behind them, keeping a watchful eye on the group. Wangsha wasn't far from Shurkan, but as they drew closer, the oppressive scent of death in the air became increasingly overwhelming. The master's gaze swept over the settlement, quickly stopping on a particularly dilapidated house where a figure stood by the door. A woman stood there, radiating a strange and unsettling aura that felt like the tangled resentment of countless dead souls. This energy was twisted together with a sinister, demonic power, similar to what he had sensed from the rat demon before. Seeing this, the master frowned. He could tell this woman was powerful, likely on the same level as the rat demon itself. He released his divine sense to investigate further, finally catching a glimpse of her true, hidden form beneath the surface. For a fleeting second, her beautiful face shifted into the head of a giant insect with cold, shimmering eyes. Then, suddenly, the woman turned slightly toward the master's hidden position and performed a polite, standard lady's bow. This gesture immediately put the master on high alert, his death energy swirling beneath the surface, ready to be unleashed. He prepared himself for an ambush or some bizarre transformation, yet after her bow, the woman remained perfectly still. While maintaining his guard against the mysterious lady, he shifted part of his attention back to Zhao Yong and the others. At that moment, Zhao Yong called out to the locals, asking if they had been safe and if their guardian spirits had appeared. The crowd stirred uneasily as several elders looked at one another in silence, until finally, a white-haired man stepped forward. Recognizing the visitor as the young lad from the Zhao family in Shurkan, the elder confirmed they had indeed heard knocking last night. 2 other families quickly spoke up as well, their voices trembling as they recounted the terrors of the previous evening. One villager claimed their door was knocked 5 times, another said 7 or 8, but thankfully, everyone was still there. The people of Wangsha began whispering among themselves until someone suddenly remembered to ask about the ugly old woman. They wondered if anyone had checked on her, and instinctively, several of them turned their heads toward that dilapidated house. The eerie woman's expression remained unchanged, as if she hadn't heard them at all, but then, something happened. A small child ran up to her, calling her silly girl, and asking if the old woman was okay. The woman simply knelt down. She handed a yellow insect liver to the child and offered what could only be described as a mechanical smile. The boy devoured the liver greedily while the woman gently patted his head, telling him that everything was fine. She said they were all doing well, and the boy happily skipped back to his mother, only to be met with a sharp scolding. His mother scolded him for eating things given by a fool, but the woman acted as if she hadn't even noticed the insult. Instead, she pulled a notebook and a stubby pencil from her clothes to write. From a distance, the master watched closely. The entry read, Observation Record 32, Giving Food to a Hungry Youngling. It noted that stroking the head can stop crying and is judged as a good deed, though it may cause dissatisfaction in nearby adults. Seeing this, the master frowned. To be honest, her behavior was more than a little unsettling. Her logic didn't stem from empathy at all. It was based entirely on observation, recording, analysis, and then execution. As he pondered this, the woman turned to enter the house. He followed immediately, stopping just 3 paces away from her. Sensing his presence, she turned to meet his gaze, and the master finally asked the question on his mind. What are you? The woman flipped through her notebook to a page stating that one should first show politeness when facing a stranger's inquiry. She looked up and forced her lips into a stiff smile, introducing herself as Pooh. The master's frown deepened. When he asked why she had such a name, she simply scratched her head, wondering the same thing as he extended his divine sense. He tried to probe her origins, feeling more clearly now the 2 massive auras that together formed this being known as Pooh. Inside her body, there were no soul fluctuations of a normal living being, only a core of consciousness barely maintaining a fragile balance. The master decided to change his approach, asking if she was learning. Pooh nodded slowly in response. She began writing in her notebook again, where he saw a new entry. New subject, unknown, possesses high curiosity toward me. The entry continued. Response plan unknown. Preliminary assessment. Danger level high, but currently no hostility. This creature was certainly interesting. He told her she could call him the Bone Sovereign. Pooh nodded and crossed out that unknown label for her new subject. She carefully wrote Bone Sovereign in its place. With a thought, the master reached out and offered her a soul pill. Pooh's body suddenly stiffened, her eyes locking onto the soul pill in his palm with an intense, fixed stare. An uncontrollable insect-like chirping echoed from her throat as saliva began to leak from the corner of her mouth. At that moment, the human persona she had constructed began a desperate struggle against her primal monster instincts. After a fierce internal battle, she took a deep breath and forcibly suppressed her overwhelming desire to devour the pill. She flipped through her notebook to Rule 15. Accepting gifts from others without reason is considered impolite behavior. She looked up at him and simply asked, why? Seeing her struggle, the master decided not to make things difficult for her. He placed the soul pill directly into Pooh's hand. She swallowed it immediately, and we see her soul finally begin to stabilize. The aura that had triggered her instincts faded away, and Pooh's tense body finally began to relax, just a little. As her emotions settled, the master chose not to answer her directly, instead asking why she chose to stay in this place. He noted that with her abilities, she could find a better life anywhere else than here in Wangsha. Staying here meant neither true cultivation nor truly integrating into human life, which didn't fit her logic of survival at all. It was a sharp question that pointed directly at the core contradiction of her behavior. Yet this time, Pooh didn't freeze up. She turned to look at the mud hut behind her, and a single word emerged from the core of her consciousness: family. After speaking that word, she fell silent again. In her unique understanding, the concept of family was everything. To her, it was an emotional bond based on blood and shared life, one defined by a high degree of altruism and self-sacrifice. Naturally, this completely contradicted her fundamental principle as a monster, which was to prioritize survival above all else. Looking at her face, which seemed to be flashing with internal logic errors, the master felt this powerful creature was actually quite innocent. He decided to stop teasing her before she truly broke, smiling as he noted that she was already doing things that didn't fit her logic. He asked why it was strange for him to do the same occasionally. Pooh couldn't argue and could only stare blankly as he looked toward her. He gestured toward the dilapidated mud hut behind her, asking if her family was inside, and Pooh gave a small nod in response. As she turned to walk toward the hut, the master flickered like a shadow and followed her inside to see what lay within. Immediately, a heavy scent of medicinal herbs and the stagnant air of decay drifted toward them in the dim, flickering light. In the corner, a single oil lamp wavered, revealing an elderly woman lying on a raised earthen bed as Pooh approached her side. She skillfully picked up a bowl of cold herbal medicine from the bedside and began feeding it to the old woman, spoon by spoon. The old woman, Chupo, struggled to open her eyes and asked if Pooh was back from helping the villagers again. Pooh didn't answer. She simply repeated the mechanical motion of feeding the medicine, a silence that Chupo seemed to have grown quite used to. Chupo called her a good child for remembering her lessons on being kind, but she was suddenly interrupted by a violent fit of coughing. The master stood by like an invisible ghost, watching as Pooh reached out to pat the old woman's back to soothe her. In that moment, he could sense that there was no actual blood relation between Chupo and Pooh as his spiritual sense expanded. From the scattered whispers of the villagers outside, he began to piece together the truth of how their story had started. Many years ago, Chupo had found Pooh in the sandy wasteland outside the village, back when Pooh was still half human and half insect. The villagers saw her as an ominous creature, but Chupo felt a connection to her, perhaps born from their shared hardships. Ignoring the village's protests, she adopted her as a second daughter, teaching her how to speak and how to walk like a human. Because of this, Chupo's family was gradually shunned, right up until Wangsha faced its first encounter with the knocking ghost. And here we learn the tragedy. The first door the ghost knocked on was Chupo's, and that night, her husband and son were both killed. Only she and Pooh survived for reasons unknown. Chupo was left bedridden by grief, and while the villagers didn't openly cast her out, they all subconsciously believed the village's disaster began at her house, convinced that Pooh had brought a curse upon them. At this moment, having finished the medicine, Pooh pulled a fresh locust from her robe and carefully broke it apart. She stuffed the larger half into Chupo's mouth. Though the old woman wondered how Pooh found grasshoppers every day, she didn't ask. She simply chewed with effort, her eyes filled with a quiet satisfaction as she told Pooh to eat the rest herself. She claimed she was too old to eat much anyway. Pooh remained silent, merely stuffing the remaining small piece into her own mouth. She chewed with an expressionless face, and once finished, she sat quietly by the edge of the bed, perfectly still. The master took this chance to investigate outside, finding no clues about the knocking ghost before returning to the hut later that night. By then, Chupo had fallen asleep, yet Pooh remained in the exact same position as before. Outside, the atmosphere shifted. A heavy, dull knocking sound began to echo, causing the flame of the oil lamp to jump violently as Chupo lay on the bed. Her body began to tremble uncontrollably. Pooh suddenly snapped her head up, her eyes fixed intensely on the door. A moment later, she stood up abruptly, and under the master's surprised gaze, she walked toward the door with total indifference. She pulled back the bolt all at once, allowing a wave of cold, deathly air to flood into the small room. Standing outside was a monstrous ghost stitched together from various corpses, a sight the master watched with genuine interest. Logically, Pooh's own aura was far more terrifying than this knocking ghost, yet after a brief, tense standoff, something strange happened. Instead of fleeing, the creature reacted in an entirely abnormal way. Its body began to quiver as its power surged. Its ghostly energy exploded outward, and a non-human howl erupted from deep within the knocking ghost's frame. The creature's stitched arms elongated and twisted into two pitch-black claws, lunging directly toward Pooh's face. But facing this ferocious attack, Pooh merely raised a slender, pale hand just as the claws were about to reach her. With perfect precision, she seized both of the knocking ghost's wrists, and suddenly, the markings on the right side of Pooh's face flared with light. A surge of powerful, dark intent erupted from her arms, instantly swallowing and dissolving the malevolent energy the ghost had unleashed. In the next heartbeat, the knocking ghost's body began to wither violently, and the stitched corpses making up its frame started peeling away. At last, the creature felt true terror. It let out a shrill, piercing shriek, struggling with all its might to break free from her grip. But Pooh's pale hands held it in a death lock, forcing the knocking ghost to twist its body with desperate, bone-snapping force. It managed to tear itself away from Pooh's grasp, leaving parts of itself behind as it fled toward the edge of the village in a blind panic. The master's voice echoed calmly behind the retreating spirit, noting that leaving wouldn't be quite that simple. And he was right, of course. A bone spike shot out, piercing the ghost's back with surgical accuracy, causing the creature's entire form to explode into a cloud of debris. Countless fragments of rotted flesh scattered through the air, and at the center of the blast, a cluster of resentful souls was finally revealed. These souls were slowly absorbed by the bone spike. Checking his inventory, the master saw the ghost now resting quietly within his storage. The warehouse fires quickly began dismantling the remains, and as he gained a Tier 3 soul crystal, the master raised an eyebrow in surprise. It was rare for a single entity to yield so many souls. A Tier 3 rank meant this creature possessed significant, dangerous power. Many demons that terrorize entire counties are only Tier 2 or 3, but what truly intrigued him was something far more unusual. This entity was actually a conglomerate of countless resentful spirits fused together, making any form of communication completely impossible. Yet its actions followed very specific rules and goals, suggesting it was being controlled. One wonders who could possess such dark skill. To refine a ghost of this caliber just to harass ordinary villagers every night seemed like an absurdly excessive use of power. We should consider that while the master controls a Tier 3 bone ghost, his own strength is comparable to a Tier 5 expert. Therefore, the person behind this knocking ghost likely holds a high rank as well. For someone that strong, ordinary lives are usually beneath notice. The flesh of commoners offers little for one's cultivation, yet this ghost, strong enough to wipe out the village, killed only one person a night. It was a puzzle that left the master deeply perplexed, though he quickly pulled his focus back to the present moment. His gaze fell once more upon Pooh, who stood silently by the doorway, staring toward the spot where the knocking ghost had vanished. Those strange, shifting eyes were still filled with a confusion that data alone couldn't resolve. This night, it seemed, was full of surprises. The master said nothing more. With a sudden flicker of movement, he vanished from the room, leaving the quiet house behind. Returning through the rift to the city of the dead, he immediately summoned Jian Huaishuang, commanding the swordsman to enter the secret realm with him. Once they arrived back at Shirkin village, the master turned to Jian Huaishuang, noting the high concentration of haunted dwellings in the area. He instructed his subordinate to begin exorcising the local spirits, emphasizing that their high quality made them perfect targets. A clear hint, really. Jian Huaishuang accepted the order instantly. As the master watched him depart, he began to calculate the potential gains from this venture. A single knocking ghost could be broken down into 1,000 Tier 2 souls, which would instantly complete the progress needed for his sacrifices. While the blood pool could produce blood and the secret realm lord provided flesh, resources were finally coming together. However, souls remained the rarest material with no easy way to harvest them. He could only hope for a bit of divine, or perhaps diabolical luck. He hoped the Kushi line would yield a few more knocking ghosts to allow for a massive profit. He was determined to see this through. His plan was to turn the entire Kushi line upside down, but first, he needed to return and upgrade his traps. Soon, we see him return to the heart of the city of the dead, standing before the evil god altar built from countless white bones. After filling the necessary progress bars for the upgrade, he reached out and activated the trap mechanism. In an instant, the entire city of the dead trembled as the bone altar erupted with a blinding, pale white radiance. The skeletal patterns on the altar's surface lit up one by one, forming a massive and incredibly complex array of dark energy. A terrifying aura, over 100 times stronger than before, exploded from his body with a thunderous force. The system interface shifted before his eyes. He had reached level 1, and his evil god physique was finally beginning to take shape. With the evil god faith panel awakened, he gained 1,000 points and unlocked a new ability, the Bone Incarnation. With bone erosion active and the building shop updated, he took another step toward becoming a truly great and terrible deity. The upgrade was complete, and though he felt a vast power surging within him, far beyond anything before, he wasn't exactly celebrating. To be honest, the cost was staggering. Reaching the next level required 10,000 Tier 3 materials, or roughly 1 billion ordinary souls. He couldn't help but marvel at how difficult the path of an evil god truly was, especially without high-quality resources like the knocking ghost. Relying solely on the inferior souls from the secret realm would have taken an eternity to reach his next divine milestone. We see him begin to examine his new abilities, starting with the Bone Incarnation, a physical manifestation of his own essence. It served as an extension of his skeletal power, while bone erosion allowed him to plant a sliver of deathly energy into bone. By rooting this into the minds of intelligent beings, he could trigger mental pollution and spiritual corruption, both quite formidable skills. These new powers finally addressed his weaknesses, as the Bone Incarnation gave him a powerful means to strike out directly. He would no longer have to rely entirely on the Ghost Manual or agents like Shirtu and Jian Huaishuang to do his bidding. Meanwhile, bone erosion added a layer of psychological warfare to his arsenal. After all, what is an evil god if he cannot manipulate hearts? Quite satisfied with his progress, he then opened the newly awakened Evil God Faith panel to check his standing. He currently had 321 casual believers, each providing a single faith point every day. These were mostly villagers he had saved who felt grateful, though their faith was far from steady. A fickle bunch, really. Their devotion could fade with time, but he also had 58 devout believers who provided 5 points each. Their faith ran deeper, involving simple prayers, though they had yet to view the bone deity as their sole salvation. Then there were the 7 true believers, like the core villagers of Dalian, who provided 20 points and remained steadfast in their loyalty. They were willing to do much for their god, followed by 2 pious believers, Shi Tu and Hong Ling, who provided 100 points each. They viewed him as their only hope in the darkness, their faith absolute. And then, there was the single fanatic believer providing 500 points. Jian Huaishuang had completely merged his own convictions with his loyalty, willing to sacrifice everything for the deity's will. After reviewing these numbers, he fell into deep thought. It seemed his influence was growing, but the path ahead remained long. He realized that expanding his faith would be a long process, one requiring careful and deliberate management. We see him move on to the construction panel, where the upgrade had unlocked several new structures, like the Bone Valley Forge. This forge could consume materials and evil god points to craft specialized weapons or strengthen the skeletons of his bone ghosts. Then there was the vengeful Soul Sentry Tower, which could be placed at the edge of his domain to warn of and attack invading spirits. The Soul Gathering Banner slowly absorbed stray energy from the environment to increase his soul reserves, all of them Imperial-grade buildings. Since they didn't cost much, he built one of each. Even if they weren't vital, they made the spiritual land look quite impressive. He decided to arrange the vengeful Soul Sentry Towers to protect the entire city of the dead, but something else caught his eye. In the building list stood a particularly striking special structure, the Flesh and Blood Ranch, featuring the flesh breeding skill. This facility allowed him to raise and cultivate unique biological creatures specifically designed to be used in his traps. By investing evil god points, he could accelerate their breeding and mutation, producing even higher quality biological materials. The flesh produced here carried a faint aura of the evil god, making his traps significantly more effective than those using ordinary meat. His eyes lit up at the discovery. This was essentially a sustainable production base for the very materials he needed most. While it required an initial investment of points, it would greatly relieve the pressure of gathering materials in the long run. As his rank continued to rise, the output of a single secret realm was becoming insufficient, so he turned his attention to the shop. The new items were dazzling, most requiring evil god points, such as the low-level Faith Talisman. This talisman could slightly nudge a target's inclination toward believing in him, alongside the single-use barrier breaking all. The all could briefly open a passage through weaker barriers, while the enhanced Seed of Resentment offered even more power. It was far more potent and stealthy than the Bone Seeds he condensed himself, followed by the Oracle Expansion Permit. Using this permit would expand the range of his Oracle by 10%. After seeing all this, he began to do some mental math. His current followers provided 1,451 evil god points daily. It seemed like a lot at first glance, but when compared to the shop items and buildings that cost thousands or even tens of thousands of points, his current income felt small. It was still quite a tight budget, and just as he was sighing to himself, he sensed a sudden commotion coming from the Howling Mine. He felt a bit puzzled. He had just dealt with the knocking stick, and it was now the middle of the night, yet many villagers were still awake. Don't they have to work tomorrow? That would be a loss. His loss, specifically. Meanwhile, inside the Howling Mine, a man named Xingyu felt that his life over the last 2 days had been absolutely miserable since being thrown into this cursed place. His entire world had been reduced to just 2 things, swinging a pickaxe and enduring the endless labor. But what truly pushed him to the brink of a mental breakdown was the constant, suffocating feeling of being watched at every moment. It wasn't living people monitoring them, but pale paper figures who considered themselves disciples of the sect. They were distributed silently in every corner of the mine. No matter what you were doing, if you looked up, you would inevitably see a pair of crudely drawn eyes staring back. Just moments ago, he was working hard on a stubborn rock. Sweat dripped down his forehead and stung his eyes, so he irritably wiped his face with his sleeve. A glimpse from the corner of his eye made his heart skip a beat. A paper figure had floated behind him without a sound. Xingyu shuddered and spun around, only to find the paper figure tilting its head and watching him with a warning. It told him not to slack off, as the senior brother had ordered them to keep a close eye on him. Xingyu trembled with fear. He decided he couldn't take it anymore. Even a dog wouldn't stay here, and resolved that he had to escape tonight. In the dead of night, while everyone was exhausted, the outside of the mine suddenly became chaotic as green ghost fires floated in. The eerie light illuminated the entire mine, and shortly after, a group of villagers wearing matching uniforms marched inside. They began directing the workers to move the ore out, as if some major project was underway in the city. Everyone scrambled to help, hoping to impress the overseers, and the scene became utterly disorganized. Xingyu's heart pounded. This was his chance. He lowered his head and blended into the crowd of people carrying materials, hoping to slip away unnoticed. He did his best to look just as motivated as the other prisoners, blending seamlessly into the moving stream of people. For the first time, he stepped out of that suffocating mine, his eyes fixed on the distant darkness where the city walls began. He shoved the materials from his shoulder onto a nearby prisoner and, taking advantage of the surrounding chaos, made his move. He dived headlong into the nearby shadows, but just as he prepared to vanish, a sharp, piercing shout rang out. "Stop right there. You in the black clothes, stop." Xingyu's heart sank as he turned back to see who had spotted him. A fat overseer was pointing directly at him, shouting with spit flying everywhere, and Xingyu felt a sudden, sharp pang of panic. No longer caring which direction he was headed, he simply bolted. All his magical tools had been confiscated, and the night was far too dark. He could only stumble through the unfamiliar city like a blind fly until Zhang Fuguei let out a thunderous cry. Prisoner escaping. The entire construction site exploded into a frenzy as everyone dropped their work to join the loud, chaotic clamor. They scrambled to find anyone in charge to report the news, shouting for Lord Hong Lin and pointing toward his escape route. Hearing the growing roar of the crowd behind him, Xingyu grew desperate, losing all sense of direction in his frantic flight. He charged blindly into a field, only to hear a sharp crack beneath his feet. He had clearly stepped on something important. Before he could even react, pairs of blood-red eyes suddenly flickered to life within the surrounding darkness. Several black snakes lunged out like lightning, raising their heads and hissing at him with visible fury. "Who is it?" one seemed to ask. You stepped on my brother. Xiao-san, go get the big sister. One particularly clever-looking snake hissed before darting away. It vanished into the edge of the field, leaving Xingyu stunned that even farming snakes could be this loyal to their duties. He tried to run, but the small snakes had already coiled around him, using their supple bodies to bind his legs firmly in place. He was rendered immobile, and right then, Zhang Tsugu's angry voice echoed from the distance. Which absolute scoundrel is it? Who dares touch my precious babies? I'll skin them alive, she screamed, her voice arriving just before she did. She laid eyes on the trapped Xingyu and the crushed spirit fat beneath his feet, and her temper instantly flared into a rage. You absolute scum, she screamed. How dare you step on the Lord's spirit field? You look decent enough, yet you spend your time doing such wicked, underhanded things. Do you have any idea that this field is a treasure bestowed by the God Sovereign himself? Xingyu let out a cold snort, still struggling to free his legs from the snakes. He aimed a sudden, forceful palm strike directly at Zhang Tsugu's chest, shouting for her to get lost. It was a strike he was certain would land. Zhang Tsugu didn't even bother to dodge. Instead, she met his attack with a punch of her own, the collision of their limbs creating a dull, heavy thud. Xingyu was sent flying backward instantly, coughing up a spray of blood as he tumbled. As he lay on the ground, we see the shock written all over his face. His expression was one of pure disbelief. She was at the peak of the second rank, just a single step away from the third rank's 7 stars level. A simple farmer possessing the cultivation of a second-rank peak master? To be honest, it didn't seem reasonable at all. Zhang Tsugu simply dusted off her hands. With such pathetic skills, you actually dared to run wild in Wangxi City? She mocked. Someone come here. Actually, never mind. Snakes, come here. She ordered them to tie the little thief up tight so he could be handed over to the Lord. The little black snakes, ever obedient, didn't hesitate for a second. In a matter of moments, they had Xingyu completely bound. By now, the villagers had heard the commotion and began to gather around the scene. Together, they escorted the prisoner back to the Lord. Zhang Tsugu approached with tears and a running nose, wailing about the injustice of it all. Lord, you must seek justice for us. This thief not only tried to escape the mines, but he also trampled one of your spirit plants. She cried that it was the Lord's treasure, one she attended to every day without a moment's neglect. The Lord's gaze finally settled on the captured Xingyu. When asked why he had done it, Xingyu simply closed his eyes, telling the Lord to kill or torture him as he pleased. He was ready for the end. Don't think for a second I'll bow to an evil cultist like you, he spat. The Lord took a step forward, looking down at him from a position of absolute power. The Lord calmly asked who had given him such courage. Xingyu snapped his eyes open, a fierce fire of rage burning within his blood-red pupils. He shouted that this was a den of evil that took lives, and as a member of the Xianshui sect, it was his heavenly duty to slay demons. He lamented that his cultivation was insufficient, regretting only that he couldn't strike the Lord down right then and there. The Lord simply spread his hands. He gestured toward the surrounding citizens, whose faces were filled with indignation. You claim I take lives? The Lord asked calmly. Then open your eyes and look closely. Tell me, when have I ever harmed a single soul in this place? Xingyu found himself suddenly, and quite awkwardly, speechless. The Lord reminded him that he had saved Daling and Sherdong villages from the jaws of snake demons, leading the people to revere him as a god. He had taken in the refugees of Bayou City, giving them a place to live, and had personally slain the demons of Tsudao County. He had returned peace to this land, and after a brief pause, he turned his attention back to the so-called members of the Xianshui sect. The Lord pointed out that he only made them work the mines to redeem themselves, never taking their lives, his words ringing out with absolute authority. We see the gaze of the surrounding citizens shift. Their anger toward Xingyu had curdled into pure disdain and open hostility. Xingyu's face flushed with a mix of shame and rage as he shouted that it was all nonsense, accusing the Lord of using sorcery to bewitch the people. He argued they would never serve him willingly otherwise, demanding to know if the Lord dared deny his role in the destruction of Bayou City. The Lord simply shook his head, explaining that the tragedy of Bayou City was the work of Bayou, who had since been absorbed by Jianhui Shuang. While he was willing to shoulder the karmic burden of that event, he noted that the original residents of Bayou City were still very much alive. In fact, they were living quite well within Wangxi City. Once again, Xingyu found himself completely and utterly speechless. His lips trembled as he insisted it must be evil magic, claiming the Lord had used illusions to twist their minds and make them mistake a villain for a savior. Hearing this, the Lord's smile grew increasingly strange. He admitted that he did, in fact, possess such a power, and asked if Xingyu wanted to experience it. A faint, eerie light flickered in the Lord's eyes as a white bone seed manifested and vanished into the space between Xingyu's brows. Xingyu felt a slight chill at the point of impact, but then, curiously enough, he felt nothing at all. He watched the Lord with deep suspicion, unsure of what had been done to him, but that uncertainty lasted only a single second. Suddenly, a cacophony of voices erupted within his mind, echoing through his consciousness with terrifying intensity. These voices began to frantically gnaw at his sense of self. His eyes grew glazed as cold sweat poured down his forehead. The Lord's voice whispered in his ear, telling him it didn't have to be this way, and urged him to reveal his true purpose. He asked why Xingyu was so desperate to escape, promising that if he simply confessed the truth, he might actually survive. Xingyu's tense body suddenly went limp as his eyes lost all focus. He muttered that his goal was to escape back to Landau City. Xingyu continued, confessing that Bayou City was merely a stop. Their true mission was to investigate a strange poison appearing across multiple counties. He described the victims' deaths as gruesome, their bodies becoming stiff as stone, with their skin turning a distinct, metallic bronze color. Like bronze statues in a temple, they remained frozen. They had tracked the clues for months, and everything pointed toward the dead soul's blood water. As those final words left his lips, Xingyu collapsed into a dead faint. The moment he hit the ground, Wei Hua stepped forward quietly. He dragged the man into the secret realm for further use. The Lord stared at the clues left behind, death energy swirling around his fingertips. Bronze-colored corpses, a poison spreading across borders, and clues pointing to the dead soul. It was a grim picture, to say the least. The hand moving behind these events seemed far more troublesome than Bai Yu and the knocking ghost combined. Meanwhile, the lights of Wangxi City remained bright. We see Li Zhang and Sugu directing the Black Snake to repair the damaged spiritual plants. The blood Bodhi vines swayed in the night wind, while inside the wailing mine, the paper people continued their work with steady precision. The sounds of Su Ziyuan and the others laboring echoed against the clatter of ore. Outside, Shirtu and Hong Ling led their followers. They cleared the remaining demons while Jian Huaishuang's paper armor glinted under the moon as nearby villages began to pledge their loyalty. A steady stream of faith flowed toward the evil god. Just then, the secret rat returned, clutching a golden garlic bulb in its mouth. The rat remarked that this poison sounded like a real headache and offered to investigate, but the Lord simply shook his head. The Whitebone avatar began to take shape behind him. There was no need for that. It was the perfect time to test a new ability. Whitebone seeds flew into several followers who possessed scouting talents, their forms quickly dispersing throughout the entire city. Their orders were clear: track the traces of the strange poison and report any contact with suspicious people or substances immediately. The spatial rift of the dead man's secret realm continued to expand, and the knocking ghost of Shurkin village had already been dealt with. Soul materials filled the warehouse, yet it still wasn't enough to reach the next level. Deep within Kushi County, something was stirring. A tremor came from the guarded yellow sand pit. It seemed the source of the knocking ghost held a hidden link to the strange poison. The Lord stood atop the white bone altar, his gaze fixed on the horizon, ready to tear through the veil shrouding Wangxi City. The prayers of the followers transformed into a vast, surging power, echoing prophecies of a golden Buddha and the arrival of the Stone Valley Beast. With the mystery of the strange poison now unfolding, the secrets of this world were being revealed layer by layer, leading Chen Sheng to issue a command. In 3 days, the army would march on Landau City. After all, it would be a waste to ignore such a convenient lead. The Lord intended to dismantle the poison's nest and bring the entire Thousand Islands County under the shadow of Wangxi City. The altar glowed with a sudden intensity as the progress for a new trap began to tick upward, marking the expansion of the evil god. And yet, this path was only just beginning to lead them into far more dangerous and uncharted territory.